You probably wouldn't have to just because. It just surprised me with my glasses on. I'm ready. Good morning. It is 10:01 a.m. on this 22nd day of March 2021, and time for today's Board of County Commissioners hearing regarding a request by Borton Lakey Law representing Ridgeline Vista LLC for a conditional rezone, case number CR 2020-0012. My name is Carrie Smith, and joining me today are Commissioners Sam White and Leslie Van Beek. Also present are Monica Reeves, our Deputy Clerk, DSD Director Tricia Nilsson, and DSD Planner Dan Lister. Welcome. The hearing is being conducted both in person and using WebEx. Everyone on WebEx has been muted and will be unmuted when it is time for them to speak. The staff report and any additional exhibits have been posted on the county website on the Land Use Hearings page. You may wish to open those documents if you haven't already done so. The chairman will maintain order by restricting inappropriate discussion and disorderly conduct. I'll take a short time to explain to you the procedures we must follow under the Canyon County Code of Ordinances 7503. If you want to testify, please indicate by selecting the raise hand icon at the bottom left corner of the participant box in WebEx. The applicant who requested the hearing or the representative will first testify since the applicant has the burden of proof. Testimony will then be given from those in favor of the applicant, followed by the witnesses who have signed to testify as neutral, and then those in opposition. The person making the request or the representative will be allowed 10 minutes for their presentation. And the spokesperson for the opposition has been designated. They will be given 10 minutes for their presentation as well. We may make exceptions for unique and unusual circumstances and complex issues. All other individuals will be allowed 3 minutes of non-repetitive testimony. When testimony in opposition is concluded, the applicant will be permitted 5 minutes for rebuttal testimony if necessary. If you refer to an exhibit or computer projection, please use specific verbal descriptions such as exhibit number, location, or direction so that a transcript can be made for review if necessary. At this time, I will read all of the attendees as listed in WebEx. After I read your name or phone number, please indicate verbally if you wish to testify in favor, neutral, or in opposition. Brent Oaken.
This is Deborah, and I am neutral on this project.
And would you like to testify?
I think not at this time. I think our attorney will probably cover all the points that are important to me. If that is not the case, I'll let you know.
Okay. That was Deborah Bruner. Brent Oaken. We've got you unmuted. Would you like to testify?
No, I'm looking on this thing.
It was kind of hard to understand you, but I heard a no.
Correct.
Okay. And Kevin McCarthy?
I'm an engineer for the owner on this project, so I'm here to answer any questions that may come up related to that.
Okay. And then Mike and Melissa Wayland?
Yes, we are here. We would like to testify in opposition.
Okay. And then those that are in person in favor testifying, I have a Matt Drown, okay, and then Todd Lakey and Alan Mills, and then neutral testimony as Darren Taylor. Roger or James, would either of you like to testify? Yeah? And Roger Craig and James Blacker. All right, so So each of you that have indicated that you would like to testify today, I'll have you raise your right hand and Monica will administer the oath.
Those names, in addition to Dan Lister and Tricia Nelson, do swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God?
Yes, it is.
All right, at this time, well, before we begin taking testimony, is there any member of the board who, for reasons of conflict of interest, requests to be excused from participating in this item?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
No.
I don't have any conflicts either. Are there any declarations pertaining to this request of meetings, such as site reviews or conversations outside of this hearing?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Van Beek.
we have a member of the audience in opposition who is also employed by Canyon County, and I have a working relationship with him and will not impugn my ability to make an objective decision, but he is a more informed user than the average person on this. So thank you for that. I'm just disclosing.
He's also my tax assessor.
I know how to too.
So I would also say that I'm very familiar with the property. I was the former floodplain administrator for the county and dealt with a lot of floodplain issues on the original subdivision. And in my role as the state floodplain coordinator, also sat through some discussions on that floodplain specifically up there in the odd way that it dies within the middle of the subdivision. So I'm very familiar with the property. I also, because I have friends at IDWR, want to disclose the conversation that I had with Aaron Skinner at IDWR regarding the subsurface water rights and just getting some background knowledge on what that looks like. So that was it for me.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, I do want to say I did ask Roger if he was going to be here. He submitted a letter in the packet and had additional information. He only stated he would be in attendance this morning, and that was the end of the conversation.
I also should note, I know Deborah Bruner. I worked with her at my former job with the farmers market work that she does on our Ag Venture Trail. So also wanted to know that. I also know half the people in this room. So I don't think that it's going to affect my ability to make a decision though. So with that was a lot to disclose, but I feel like I did it. So we will now begin taking evidence by calling on Development Services staff to present a staff summary and any late exhibits.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Dan Lister from Canyon County Development Services. Staff will quickly go through the summary of the staff report, then open it up for questions. As stated in the staff report, the applicant is requesting a conditional rezone from an A zone to a rural residential zone, which is a 2-acre average minimum lot size. The request includes a development agreement to restrict residential development to no more than 20 lots in accordance with their conceptual site plan as shown on the screen. On the screen shown here shows the history of that area and this property. So to quickly go through this, in 1995, there was a conditional use permit for this area to expand their dairy operations. However, about 2004, what you see on the screen is a land division that occurred and was approved on this site. You can see the multiple LS numbers where the land division, land splits were approved. As part of this, lot 14, as you can see at the bottom there, which is this lot we're talking about today, this property, was divided off, and the building permits for that were transferred to these lots over here to create more divisions. So this property does not have any building permits associated with it. In 2006, going further into history here, you can see that 2005, 2006, there was another conditional use permit for this property to divide the property essentially to what is being requested today, except I think it was 27 lots versus 20 lots being requested. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended denial of that request due to lot size and road issues, as shown on the screen here. The applicant did submit an appeal, and that sat for a couple of years before they eventually withdrew their application. So, as shown on the screen, the property is shown here off of Shalaka Road that connects to Emmett Road. This is a land use designation of it's agricultural or future land use designation is agriculture. However, it's the nearest residential designation is over 5,000 feet south of the property, as you can see on the screen. Zoning, the subject parcel and surrounding areas are agricultural, and the nearest similar zone would be 12,000 feet south of the property. There are no subdivisions in the area. I think the nearest one is 2.4 miles west of this site. As shown here are the soil classification maps. This is a kind of a valley area, so as you can see in the valley, there's suited soils in that area. To the north and south, you start seeing least suited soils because of the topography pretty hilly at that point. And it shows on the screen here between 2004 and 2018, ag has been utilized on this property and has not changed. Comments. So staff did receive comments from agencies. We received a comment from Idaho Department of Fish and Game. They stated that this is within, let me find the actual language here, that it's within the range of slick spot peppergrass, which is a threatened species. However, they don't find that to be located in that area. However, they do show, I'm not going to be able to pronounce some of these words right, but they found a certain type of hawk, curlew, owl in that vicinity. They don't have surveys really showing if it's really going to be affected or not, so they provided best practice management, or best management practices to kind of address that. The applicant staff provided a condition stating that they would do a biological assessment for doing development. The applicant didn't seem to oppose to that. Middleton Fire Development shall meet their access to water supply requirements. That secondary emergency access is also going to be required. One of the differences in this letter is that they highly recommend using the Firewise USA best management practices due to the high fire risks of this area. It's a very dry area, so the applicant has agreed to adhere to the best management practices shown on that, which is Exhibit D of the development agreement. Idaho Department of Transportation did not indicate that this would impact state highway road networks. Canyon Highway District basically stated the access is via that existing private road, Shalaka Road. Proposed development is not anticipated to require a traffic impact study. Bureau of Land Management, this states basically any uses or modifications to their access or their lands would require authorization by that agency. IDWR NFIP State Coordinator says this is a flood zone A with no base flood elevation information, and therefore the development would require a base flood elevation study. As stated in staff report, this is zone A, which has no base flood elevation. However, the plans or the conceptual plans are showing that development would be located outside of the floodplain, and so if they are able to modify the development to where it's not impacting the floodplain, they may not have to do a base flood elevation study. Public comments, we did receive a lot of letters and concerns regarding this. One was from Roger Craig, with letters kind of questioning the HOA, the amendment to the HOA, including this property, the serious floodplain issues of that property, as well as this being really good farmland and should be protected. We also received letters from Lewis and Lola. I'm not Lola Gianni. Sorry if I messed that up. With concerns about the irrigation water rights, the subsurface rights basically of that property, and if those are going to be sold off. Alan did respond to that, saying water rights will be provided to each lot, and The ag will be protected by the HOA, so there should not be any issues of selling those rights off. Kyle and Deborah Bruner did have many questions and concerns, and so they were opposed, subject to lot sizes being a minimum of at least 8 to 10 acres, that they utilize building envelopes, continue farm activities be protected, and that they be part of the road maintenance agreement. The applicant is proposing all those things, in compliance with all those requests. Steve and Teresa Schwartz, they also had very similar concerns regarding negative impacts to protected species, farmland, and the existing road system, concerned about getting infrastructure like phone and power to the site, because they do not see a way for that to get there. And then the flooding and hillside hazards that come from this development. They also never saw the amendment that was approved between the HOA and that site, so they had concerns about that. And then they said if approved, they want a biological assessment, runoff management plan, upgrade to the Sherlocko Road, possibly with power and fiber by the developers, and then agreement to protect existing homeowner from development. Also, we had a letter from Darren Taylor, Subdivision Maker LLC, representing High Plains HOA, following just adding more conditions. So they want to use to be subject to the existing CCNRs. Again, this is not a plat. This is a land division where they develop CCNRs afterwards. It's not part of the platting process. Any signs would be located outside of the High Plains development. Lot sizes shall be a minimum of 8 acres, so not an average, but at least a minimum. And developers pay for the improvements to Sherlocko Road. And with that is being said because there's points of Sherlocko Road that don't meet county's private road requirements. Staff's review of our requirements, county requirements, is it has to be 24 feet wide, it has to have a certain subbase, a certain amount of minimum requirements. And so this road right now is considered legal non-conforming. So it was created at a time that met the code at that time, but this doesn't meet our code today. So any expansion to it needs to meet our today's requirements. And that is why staff required that they at least meet the minimum requirements of private road standards for this existing road and whatever extension that they are going to need for that development. So staff has stated that we are recommending approval subject to certain conditions as shown on the screen. Late exhibits that were provided to the commission is Exhibit 12 from Todd Lakey representing the applicant, and this had to do with the existing private road. But then that they did core samples, and the applicant did agree at the end to replace it with, to make the sizing, and also I think to remove the upper layer of the road to meet the 2-inch asphalt mat that would be required. And so they want the actual conditions to reflect that, and it provided the board an alternative to the conditions regarding that existing road. Exhibit 13 is from Darren Taylor, Subdivision Maker LLC, representing the HOA, and the response basically states that their request only meets some of the requirements. They still want the subbase to be met, which doesn't show that in their test results. So they feel that it's important to have it meet at least the minimum because of potential wear and tear. It's not staying in good condition for very long. And then Exhibit 14 is Mr. Lakey's presentation when he present that. And with that concludes that presentation. I do see on the screen, real briefly, the conditions shown on the screen are different from what the P&Z Planning and Zoning Commission recommended. this is probably from that slide from staff's initial review with them. So I'll kind of go over the differences. So condition 2A, 1 or I, that's where I think on here on the screen it says development shall have a minimum average lot size of 8.5 acres. They agree to a minimum lot size of 8 acres. And then the condition being talked about with reference regarding the existing road is 2A4. It's the existing road, Chilocco Street, and new private road to serve the future development shall meet the minimum requirements of CCDO section 710.03, 2 and 3, subsections 2 and 3. And that's where I think the applicant is recommending that change that staff mentioned to that existing Chilocco road. And then also shown on here the change regarding the wildfire prevention plan. That one still shows the initial recommendation. However, the PMZ did allow for the change to state on 2E that the applicant will prepare a wildfire preparation plan addressing fire-wise, D, use of landscaping, defensible spaces and vegetation. This plan will be submitted to the fire district for their review and comment and is subject to approval by the county as part of the preliminary plat. So that is what they agreed to. One of the changes staff does want to make to item D is that after talking to Idaho Department of Fish and Game, they don't want to be an approval agency. So they're fine with reviewing the assessment when it's done and commenting, but they don't want to be an approval agency. So they want to approve removes from that condition, and the assessment shall be reviewed and commented by the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. And so they're fine with that, but they don't want to be the enforcer on them. So, and with that, that concludes that presentation.
Thank you, Dan. Do you have questions for Dan?
Madam Chair.
Chair Van Beek?
Dan, in the conceptual site plan for this development, it's an irregularly shaped parcel. I'm looking at the staff report, page 2, and it shows just a little cutout, and this doesn't show that. Can you address that? It's a Google map I'm referencing.
Okay. So 2018 Google map of that. So what staff was trying to show on there is that there is consistent use for farm ground or farm use on or agriculture uses on that property. It wasn't intended to show the conceptual versus what is actually there. It's more of showing that the agricultural activities are still have been.
And I understand what you're saying. Thank you for that. That looks like a significant piece, though. So you have the conceptual site plan here with a 8-acre lot size. What's the impact of that cutout? Does that make sense?
Right. And I think we kind of addressed it through the summary. The impact is obviously it's going to fragment that farm ground. And then also what is shown, if you look at Google Maps versus this, you can also see that the topography lines in there where there will be a lot of hillside development to the north. So that's why we have conditions that they have to meet hillside development requirements at the time of platting, which they would demonstrate at that point, soil tests and things to ensure that it's not going to be a hazard. And then they also would have, at that point, a plan of how that would be graded and how to control drainage and revegetation at that point.
Thank you for the clarification. So I'm looking at this. I can see now that the lots that would be impacted potentially couldn't have buildable space anyway. So this it becomes a moot point then.
Right.
How is the ground that's being farmed out there now currently irrigated? It's my understanding that it is in active production, but that it's not just pasture grass, that there's been potatoes or something else on there, and that potatoes require water, so how are they doing that?
My understanding is that they have subsurface water rights, and I believe they went out there, and I forget where they showed the location. Maybe there's a better map I can use here. there's a knoll where I think the existing well comes from, that irrigates the property. And I believe it's that one site that irrigates that whole property. That's my recollection, but I think the applicant can probably give some more history on that.
And I would have questions then about that well. So there's one well out there now that you're saying serves this 190 acres. Is that what you're saying?
That's my understanding.
And so if we look at the fire district's requirements on that, they're indicating multiple hydrants out there was the way I interpreted that report. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think when looking at that report, I think that's their standard letter. And so they always say you can do sprinklers, you can have hydrants. Hydrants typically are, you can city services and you pull that water there, then you can establish hydrants there. In this case, that probably wouldn't be the case. So it's providing them options of how to provide the minimum water flow to suppress fire. So that's their standard letter.
Okay, and in that standard letter, they have language in italics halfway down the page on there that says, please note that the fire code official has the ability to adjust the fire flow requirement for IFC if, and that's the operative word there, the building is fully sprinkled with an NFPA 13D system. So how restrictive is that on the counties? We don't have the requirement for IFC on the ordinance. So can you address that?
Right. So again, this is a letter that the fire district typically sends out, and they always, in this location, always have requested fire sprinklers if they cannot provide minimum fire flows or address that. So that has always been their condition. However, as you said, as you stated, the county has not adopted the fire requirement, and therefore, at the building permit stage, it's something that has not been something that the developer has to do, something that's recommended, but they have not been required to put fire sprinklers in based on state law right now. And therefore, again, this is a standard letter, but we have not observed that requirement.
Okay, and I'm going to jump to the building envelope portion of the development agreement. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. Maybe you can help me, because on a hillside development, you're automatically going to have some restrictions that don't allow for building on the hillside that's close to greater than 15%. But if we put houses on those parcels, and let's say that they're outbuildings and the homes take up an acre or 2 acres, if these are going to be hobby farms, so they might have stables, what's the point of putting a building envelope on there? Because for all intents and purposes, the ag portion of that is going to be removed. They won't be able to pull equipment through there.
Right. So, through the chair, so there's some of those allotments going back to the conceptual plan. The northern lots are really encumbered by the hillside, and you're correct in the sense that there's really no ag being protected to that because it's all hillside. It's probably more pasture land, but very slopey. The idea behind the building envelopes is to reduce the amount of development allowed on each site. So if you do not do that, an 8-acre lot, they can put accessory structures related to a residential use throughout that property. And with doing that, it would probably be locked down to more of the hillside development plan that they would have as part of the plat, to where they're showing where they could grade somewhere on the road and that area, to where it would lock it down to that 2 acres and nowhere else.
Does it exclude secondary residence on there then with that restriction?
It could if there's no room for it, but no, we're not recommending that at this point.
Okay. I have 2 more questions, Madam Chair. There was some... Sorry, go ahead. Okay. There was some concern on the part of the neighbors when an absence of a neighborhood meeting, they were able to submit comments, but have we received any feedback where there's a lighter restriction now on having in-person meetings so that they have the benefit of that information at the same time?
Yeah. So my understanding is that the code that allowed for the emergency neighborhood meeting to where there's no in-person has expired. So I believe at the end of October that expired of last year. So we are back in person.
Okay, but this preceded that, or, okay.
Yeah.
And then there was comments that the homeowners association did not allow for further subdivision of this property, which I understand is an extension of the High Desert subdivision. Can you expand on that, please?
I do not have information on that. I just have stories back and forth from the neighbors. So I believe the applicant and maybe the neighbors will be able to expand on that better.
Thank you, Dan.
What I just gleaned from that though is have you asked for a copy of the CCNRs and were they not provided?
Staff thought I already had it in our packet, but when staff looked further into it, I don't have a copy of that. So it was, I don't feel,
Okay.
yeah, unfortunately, I don't think I had.
That was one of my questions, in a letter received from a homeowner. Go to it. Exhibit 6A, from Roger Craig. It says, the previous HOA officers were coerced and made some very questionable decisions for the parties wanting to develop parcels. And there's a serious flooding issue which adversely affect. So I wanted to know if there was a previous HOA document and then was it changed? And then if it followed whatever legal process, and maybe we need to see those and then get an interpretation. I don't know.
Yeah, at the end of the day, any HOAs or CCNRs
Or civil issues.
Yeah, and my understanding, and I think the applicant and the neighbors will be able to state more. My understanding is the HOA originally didn't have this thought that showed development, but I think the applicant or the owner of that time and the HOA head at that time came to an agreement, of some sort to bring it into the HOA. So I don't know the extent of that. And again, I don't have it in my record.
Okay. I feel like that might be important for us to have, and we could go through testimony and get some feedback. If there's a lot of back and forth, I feel like we might want to just ask for the records and then evaluate them. So we'll leave that for a minute. And then there's also, I guess I'll look for the applicant on that question. I think that for me, I don't have any additional questions of staff.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek?
I'm sorry, I do have an additional question. The secondary emergency access for fire, where would that be located, Dan?
That's a very good question. This conceptual plan does not show one. It's a recommended condition by it's a requirement by the fire district. So at the time of planning, the applicant would have to address that. But the conceptual plan, this is just a rezone, so the conceptual plan does not show that, but they would have to address that at the time of.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to verify that that's what I was looking at. And then the straight line of that road there, I live on a straight line like that. It tends to encourage drag racers. Had that. So that there's nothing really in the topography that you can do to mitigate for that, yes or no?
No, I mean, that's an existing road right there. That's how it was developed. I believe that's some other concerns, the neighbors, that it already has been used for that. So
okay, and then on the 24-foot wide road, I wanted to make sure that I heard this correctly, and I think what you're saying is there will have to be a rebuilding, maybe a re-roading of that road, the existing road, and then the new, both of those will have to meet what the standards are for the roadways, correct?
Correct, and that is what staff is recommending, as well as the P&Z. What came out of the P&Z hearing basically is staff saying there's a minimum requirement. This doesn't currently meet it. It's off by 2 feet, and we don't know what's really underneath it, if it truly meets our code or not. And the applicant did provide all, information basically just saying that may be too much for this development, and if we believe it's in good shape, and provided some testimony on that. However, between the representative of the HOA and review by the PNC. They're saying that those improvements come with development in expanding development in that area, and developers should essentially look into that and pay the cost to improve that. And that's where they left that condition untouched, and it has to meet minimum requirements. Our code doesn't have a variance regarding minimum construction of a private road. It does have engineering requirements that they use a certain type of material, and they can lower the certain sub-base and base based on engineering requirements of a certain title. If we get the title on there, but there is things like that, but they would have to prove it up through engineering. But mainly, it's to meet the minimum requirements.
And so, Dan, I have a question. You referenced a table that had the subsurface requirements for that. So a 2-inch asphalt base, to me, seems a pretty light base for that. And I know when that construction was going across the road, they laid a 4-inch asphalt base with gravel, with other things. So can you tell me the name of that exhibit again?
I think staff provided, but also Darren Taylor's last exhibit, Exhibit 13, that was just provided. He also has that section of the private road construction requirements, and he kind of highlighted the requirements, and then also you see the notes where alternative paving sections, as well as talks about thinner sections of the private road are possible, subject to traffic index proposed by the applicant and reviewed by the county engineer, subject to R value, ISPWC standards, and geotechnical investigation.
And so we're really focused on the last quarter of this page that's been highlighted. And so I don't see, I'd have to compare that. There's a lot of information in this particular experience, but I don't see an asphalt thickness requirement in here. Is that missing? Am I not understanding how to read this? Is that the plant mix pavement?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then would this stay a private road with the replatting? Okay, thank you for the information.
On condition 2B, I think that this condition needs to, I don't think that we should allow that exception there. I think we can't allow it.
Madam Chair, what are you referencing, please?
The conditions of approval, Exhibit B.
Thank you.
I think that it should just state at the time of preliminary plat submittal, applicant shall comply with section 10A1110. And if they can meet an exception, then at the time, then let that happen. But I think that we would be in the wrong to just have a blanket.
Well, the question is too, do you even need it? Because
they have to comply with the code anyways, yeah, so let's delete that. And then,
the entire B.
Yep. And in 2D, I know that you want to remove the words "and approved," but will this include the building timeframes of when it's safe to build, like for the habitat?
I think in this case, it's just to identify if there is habitat. So they don't have surveys out there, so they didn't know it has a possibility of having these species there. But on top of their letter and letters from the applicant, they're saying, no, we see some species out there. So it's just an assessment to see if there's something out there, and if so, they will have mitigation measures for when development does occur, and it would be added to their construction plans or CCNRs at that time to ensure future development matches the best management practices or mitigations shown in that assessment, if there's any.
So do you have any review process of that? It says that it'll be incorporated into construction plans, but will that be submitted before the preliminary plat then?
We can add that. I think it says at the time of preliminary plat submittal, yeah. So it has to be part of the submittal of that preliminary plat.
So, but I mean, you could argue that the mitigation measures don't have to be submitted.
We can,
Just, yeah, when this comes back, will you just make sure that that's pretty clear?
yeah.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek?
I just wanted to follow your thought on that. So can you help me understand if let's just follow the trail. Obviously, if this is denied, that's a moot point, but if it's approved, then you have the survey and the assessment coming after there's an approval. So what if mitigation isn't possible? You know what I'm saying?
If they can't meet the conditions of approval, then the subdivision would not move forward. And then that last time requirement, if they can't meet all the conditions of approval within 2 years, then it reverts back to ag.
The chair, they would have to come back and modify the development agreement to
They could do that.
adjust the condition.
But they never assess the site ahead of an approval to provide information that informs at a greater level?
They could.
Typically, they don't, most developers don't want to pay the money to do that until they get an approval, and then they can prove up at the time of the next permit, which comes back before a hearing body. So typically they want that, but it's in the power of the commission to ask for reports prior to decision.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Van Beek?
And my problem with that is we had something similar that was an approval where, again, Fish and Game did not want to have any teeth or any skin on the plate.
Mm-hmm.
And then Army Corps of Engineers, it was all a very benign process. The agencies that you depend on for comment and review, coming in after the fact, there's very little that they're willing to jump in on and provide comment. So I guess to that, I'll object just a tiny bit. Thank you.
I will say after you listen to testimony, you can still request additional information.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I'm just saying
to make a decision.
Yes, procedurally, and that's not meant to indicate an approval or denial. I'm just saying the process and how that unfolds. I would like more information on the front end for informed decisions. Thank you.
And then for, this is probably a precursor for the applicant. I wanted some additional information on the water transfer from IDWR from ag to residential and what that looks like. If it's going to be transferred to the homeowners association or in like the 20 individual lots. And then I wanted to know if we can add a condition that limits uses to not allow secondary residences and no golf course. And then I wanted to know, can we be less restrictive? Because right now, ag-related activities are not allowed. And if we're trying to maintain the character, you would think that ag-related activities would be allowed in that subdivision.
I think the
Can we do that?
does allow.
It doesn't.
Okay.
It requires a conditional use permit.
Madam Chair.
I'm looking at it right now.
What specifically are you talking about for ag-related uses?
Uses that include incidental farm equipment sales and services, incidental farm supply sales, roadside stands, sod and/or turf farms, you-pick fruits and vegetables, corn mazes, similar uses that do not involve processing, except those incidental operations necessary to prepare for market or to convert into marketable form.
So you're saying that to maintain the ag character of that area, those would need to be included at some level?
I think they could be included.
Okay, yes,
Maintain the character of the area.
Okay.
Madam Chair, the development agreement is more restrictive. It can't be more liberal than the base.
That's what I figured.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek.
There's a letter in here from the Bureau of Land Management that talks about wanting knowledge on activities that would be on their ground. Out in that area, there's a lot of dirt bike riding. How is that addressed in that letter, and is that included, prohibitive? How do we manage that?
I've talked to BLM about that letter, and basically they don't see any issues with this. They don't see this impacting their access or their land, but they still want review of it at the time when it comes to plat, just in case. And if there is any modifications or uses that impact their lands, they would want they want the ability to review and have authorization or could gain authorization before completing.
Did they give you an example of what a use, a pre-approved use would be?
They did not. They just said any modification or impacts to their access to public lands or their public lands in general, not anything abutting it. So they had no concern about that, just anything that touches or uses their access. They want them.
Madam Chair.
Sure, Randy.
Do you know how much from the line here, we're on the border of Jim County to the city limit, how much ground are we talking about as the crow flies? Do you know? Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. So at this time, we did have some late exhibits that were shown. And does anyone have any objections to any of these late exhibits before we enter them into the record? All right. Let the record show that these exhibits have been entered. So at this time, we are going to move on to the applicant for testimony in favor. So Todd Lakey, you get the hot seat. Do you have any content or exhibits you'd like to share?
Madam Chair, not any additional parts.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, before we start, for the record, Todd Lakey, address 12905 in the city of Court, Nampa, Idaho 651. Madam Chair and Commissioners, I'd like to start by thanking staff for their recommendation of approval, also the Planning and Zoning Commission for their recommendation of approval. We started this request with a comprehensive plan map amendment. But as we discussed this with staff, our request for 8 to 10 acre lots promoted continuing ag-related uses similar to what's going on out there now. That fit with the comprehensive plan, so there's no need to change the map. This will be a mix of high-end homes and small-scale agricultural related uses, horse property. Next slide. So this is a very unique piece of property. It's a continuation of the initial plan of development for High Plains States development to our west. Those are mostly 6 to 10 acre lots, 6 to 10 acre lots, mostly 9 acre lots. Public lands exist to the north and to the south. Again, that's good for those who like to have horse property, like horses. Little Land Company, that's our governor's family property to the east. And then, this is a natural extension of that development, but it's extremely unlikely that any further development will happen because of the fact that it's public lands and Land Company. So we're not establishing a pattern or a trend that will expand further. This is the natural expansion of what's out there, and that will be it. Site plan, Commissioners, the floodplain issue has been addressed. We're very aware of the floodplain. That's the blue line on the site plan there on the west end. Our plan is to stay out of the floodplain. We designed the road accordingly. We also intend to keep structures out of the floodplain. We were okay with the 2 acre built envelope with a roughly 9 acre parcel. That gives you a lot of flexibility to work on that and maintain the open space. Next slide. Specifically from the Little Land Company folks, they're supportive. They acknowledge that Ridgeline Vistas, the property owner, has been a good neighbor and support the application and recognize that it can coexist compatibly because of the larger acre lots that they're proposing. Next slide. So I won't hit a lot of specifics, but the High Plains CCNRs recognize that the property will be developed in the future. So there isn't a provision that says no further development. It's actually the opposite. The developer talked about future properties being developed and that property owners would not object to that. With the crash in 2008, 2009, that kind of derailed the development plans at that time. We've had multiple communications with the homeowners association and reached agreement as to how our application would go forward. We agree to be incorporated into their CCNRs, have the same standards, the same restrictions they have. Each lot would have the same rights and the same obligations that those lot owners currently have now, such as road assessments, maintenance, those kind of things. We also agreed to the 8 acre minimum lot size. and agree that we'll pay for the road improvements associated with the development. Next slide. So the comprehensive plan supports the application. As I said, there was no need for a map change. Just hitting the general points in the comp plan, our proposal is compatible. It allows for continued ag-type uses, orderly extension of the existing similar use, provides a land use balance. We're looking at high-end residential and small-scale ag-type uses in the same project. Housing provides a diversity of housing choice. Commissioners, I've done a lot of 1 to 3 acre parcels. You've seen a lot of projects where demand is high and supply is low for those. I haven't seen an 8 to 10 acre project that's probably pretty practical. So there really is next to nothing out there that's like this. Mr. Mills will talk a little bit more about that. Next slide. So the ground is not primed for traditional row crop production. It has been in farming, it has been out of farming over the years. Mr. Drowns, the owner of the property, the best one to address that. But the last few years it's been farmed simply to keep it down. I always think the direct experience is the best indicator on the viability of the farm ground. But the soils map shows 47.08% suited soils, 16.19 moderately, and 36.72 best. So generally, most of the property, 62.19, is least suited. The best suited tends to run down through the middle of it. And again, these 8 to 10 acre lots really help maintain that ag area. Next slide. So where large scale row crop type production is viable, small scale ag type activities can be. And I think it's viable because large-scale agriculture is a business. It has to generate a profit. Where a small-scale operation isn't always about business. It's about somebody that's interested in doing that type of thing. Whether it's a hobby garden, raising horses or raising cattle. It's something they enjoy. It's not a necessity. It's something they're willing to support themselves financially. Next slide. So there was a USDA study in 2014 that talked about just small-scale farms in general. They can be viable. They have common characteristics. They're not a single stage. They're typically a single stage production. Usually you have a few cows that you're raising for yourself. You may be selling them to folks. You may be butchering them yourself. They don't involve typically large field crops. There's been some alfalfa, I think, production out there, but they're more high value type crops or growth to support that. Next slide. So whether they're horse properties or cow or have some cows as they do currently, that's what you mostly see out there in high plains. But folks could raise flowers, they could have organic vegetables, herbs, berries, all those things folks can successfully grow. The water rights will be apportioned, Commissioner, to each lot. Mr. Mills can address that a little bit more as far as the well plans there. So individual lot owners will have more water rights than just a half acre that typically comes with residential. Those are some of the parcels that you see out in high plains currently. As you can see, there's horse property, some cattle, some pasture and alfalfa. Those are only example homes, not actual homes that are out there. But those are the type of homes that will be built. Next slide. So that's kind of a demonstration of Shallow Road. It's just over a mile, it's about 1.25 miles in length. We agreed with the homeowners association going in that the road was generally in good shape with some typical wear and tear. Our proposed use will have less of an impact on that road. The agricultural uses with the heavy equipment and trucks coming and going have a much more negative and damaging impact on the road than additional residential use will be. So we're reducing the impact on Shallow. Next slide. That said, there was a lot of discussion with the Planning and Zoning Commission. They didn't want us to tear out the road and build an entirely new road. We didn't want to do that. But they did suggest that we pull that core sample and look at it and see what was there. We did that. And the proposed condition of approval that we submitted was a result of some of our initial engineering. But that said, commissioners, we'll just pull that proposed application or that proposed condition, and we'll just comply with county road standards. So that condition that's in there currently, leave it as is. As Mr. Lister mentioned, there's some ability to engineer that. So you may have differing levels of different types of aggregate, and we'll work on that engineering. We think we can address that through the engineering, but ultimately the county engineer will approve that process. Next slide. On the fire district, commissioners, they mentioned their standard fire code, water flow supply, those kind of requirements. What they didn't mention was that Idaho Code 41-253 specifically says that single-family dwellings on 5 acres or greater are exempt from those fire flow requirements and the access requirements. So I think that's a recognition that those generally drive urban type development where houses are closer together. That's not what we have here. So we're willing to comply with the Firewise plan and talk about the type of vegetation and design and landscape. But the P&Z specifically excluded the access and fire flow requirements in their condition. Madam Chairman, we are pretty much out of time. We'd ask for your approval with the conditions that were mentioned by staff. And I don't think we have any objections to the conditions that Madam Chairman mentioned as well, simply complying with code when it comes to the floodplain. So, Madam Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions commissioners would have.
How'd you know you were at 10 minutes?
4 o'clock right there.
Oh, I'm like looking around like, how did you get so good at that?
I was going to tell you years
Man, Todd.
doing this, I'm instinctual, but I don't want to.
I was impressed. I'm like, you saw me looking like weird. Hey. Commissioner White.
Would you, tell me about the water rights again, Todd? They are appropriated according to lot size or acreage, or how is this?
Madam Chair and Commissioner White, as I said, I'll let Commissioner Mills address this a little bit more, but there's subsurface water rights with the existing ag well that's out there, so there's not surface water rights. The property's typically been wheel line irrigated for those portions that have been in ag. The plan is to take those water rights which apply to the large portion of the property and keep them on the property, but transfer them to the individual lot owners versus just the ag well for the whole site.
Okay, so I'm not a lot. I've always lived inside a city limit. So, do they pay for those water rights? Is it included in the price of the building lot, then the water rights, so they, in fact, then own them? Okay, I see the head shaking, so thank you.
I have the record, so you have it, but yes, it was part of their ownership and design.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
The applications, they would be pressurized systems. So will you guys be putting in the 20 wells to pressurize and irrigate the land?
Madam Chair, I think the pressurized portion, we're not talking about a central system. I think it's maintained. I'll let something different there, but pressurized within individual portions.
So, does that make a difference to staff if they said that they were going to have a pressurized system and they're not?
Well, it's not conditioned right now, so you can condition that if you want that on there, or at the time of preliminary plat, they have to prove up their irrigation cases. Again, this is something being proposed as having dwellings on there, then maintaining ag, so we may want some more information about how that's going to be irrigated. I think that's some of the decisions made by the board in the past regarding these type of requests, so again, it's up to the board to want to add conditions regarding that or not.
I think that's really important that there's a plan that can be funded that makes sure that those water rights are utilized and it maintains the character of the area. I think that would be really important. So, Tell me on your site plan, Mr. Leakey, in your testimony, you said that, their expansion is not planned. There's in the record a lot of information that this expansion was always planned. Yet, however, the original one was only completed with a administrative land division process. They transferred them, they utilized all of their rights. So when you say it was planned, it wasn't county planned, it was property owner planned, correct?
Madam Chair, yes, when I'm talking about plan, I'm talking about what was the intent of the landowners. Specific section that I'm referencing in the CCNRs is Article 2, Sub E, which says additional development or annexed property to all prospective purchasers and actual lot owners shall be on notice if the declarant intends to develop one or more of the lots or parcels to smaller acreages, and declarant so reserves the right to do so. Also intends to purchase additional properties adjacent to one or more of the lots for further development and may bring such property into this declaration. Lot owners agree they shall not challenge in any way such addition of any properties to this declaration or any agency claim. So it wasn't the county that defined the for additional growth, it was the developer and the folks put on notice to purchase the property.
So you were just reading from the CCNRs. Can you submit that as an exhibit?
Sure.
Can you give that an exhibit number so that we can have a copy? And then can you confirm what was the date of that?
2004.
2004. So were the CCNRs changed in 2004 after the original administrative land division, High Plains, was developed?
Chair, I don't believe so. I think what you're referencing was a comment in regard to the agreement by the homeowners association and the board to agree as to what the future development of our site would look like. It wasn't a change in the CCNRs. Our desire isn't to change the CCNRs. It was an agreement with the homeowners association as to how we would move forward.
So the CCNRs are the ones that you're submitting are the original CCNRs and they're still in effect today.
I believe so.
So on your site plan, if you don't anticipate expansion, why does your road go through?
So
then we'll reference Exhibit 2.
I guess, Madam Chair, I'm not sure why we put a cul-de-sac at the end of that. I guess we could.
Okay, and then how about second emergency exit? Have you thought about that? How that will be resolved?
Madam Chair, that comes down to the code requirement that with these being 5-acre plus lots outside of an impact area, the access requirements don't apply.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Van Beek?
can I just follow up on that? And I hear what you're saying, and we've had a lot of discussion about fire flow requirements, but on the emergency access, if you had basically a big circle there, I know that, is that included in High Plains Estates? I'm assuming that it is, but you would have, for all intents and purposes, a secondary access on that south and southwest portion there that's a part of High Plains if you extended that cul-de-sac.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek, so if you're talking about extending that cul-de-sac south, that's in the existing High Plains,
That's actually, so on the east end, so the south, right here.
right, that's where I was looking, Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek. That crosses a piece of property that we don't control.
Okay.
So by a different landowner would require site approval from them.
So it's not a part of the development of High Plains Estates, or it is, it's just there, it's not available for access.
Correct, you have to give their approval to do that.
Okay. Madam Chair, Dan?
To the chair real quick. My understanding when talking to Middleton Fire, or the fire district, it's because Highland Plains and this development on Chilaka Road creates over 30 residential. And so it's not the secondary access within this subdivision, it's secondary access on Chilaka Road at that point, because it served more than a certain amount of residents. So that's their concern. So it wouldn't be a secondary access off of there, it would be a secondary access from that whole development, which is...
Which is not possible.
Right.
So then what? So then you don't allow any additional houses?
Or as Mr. Lakey said, it would be per his review of the code for the fire, it would be exempt from that report, which I have never seen that.
I've used it, it was for an individual lot, not a subdivision.
Right.
So I think we'd need an interpretation on if it's for a subdivision. So let's write that down that we need that for an interpretation on the exemption. And then probably an updated site plan, if this is approved, that shows because it does look like we're expanding into the other area. And for floodplain stuff, the maps that we are under right now for this area, those maps were created in the 1970s from USGS maps. They identified areas of known flooding. I read in, I believe, some of the original planning and zoning applications, the testimony that there was a flood in the area of 1978. One of the main things that constantly got brought up, whether it was from the FEMA level, the state level, or even from our interactions, was that the floodplain doesn't just end right there. The water doesn't stop. And so it was a very inadequate floodplain delineation. It's also dry, but it takes water in the event of a high runoff event from the plains. And so that's where the water naturally goes. So my concern with allowing, which is why I wanted to remove the exception, is we really don't know where that water goes and how can we maintain a channel that takes that water. I'm okay if we don't have a flood study, but knowing we need some type of plan that can hold that water in a flooding event.
Madam Chair, I think we're okay with just applying. We've got to deal with floodplain lines as they sit. And don't know what change in the future may be. But complying with the ordinance is complying with the ordinance.
Yeah.
Madam Chair. So is what I hear you saying a flash flood, in the event of a flash flood?
Yes.
Then we would mitigate for that, which a French drain, something like that that.
Those aren't typically used for floodplains. It's just maintaining a water course.
Okay.
And so this one, it's really hard because the floodplain just stopped. It's the only floodplain in Canyon County that just stopped.
Okay. They
basically, from what I heard, when this was from my previous role, was that funding. They ran out of money in Canyon County and it stopped. So it didn't mean that the flood stopped, the floodplain stopped. That was just the limit of the study. Tricia?
Yes, Madam Chair, in Exhibit 6A, and when Mr. Craig comes to testify, our ordinance does require us, beyond just the FEMA map, to review all information on flooding, and he does reference some photos, and it might be helpful to be requested to get the benefit record.
Would be good. We'll do that. Duly noted, Mr. Craig. Can't talk, but nod your head.
When it's his turn.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a couple of additional questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Van Beek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What was the plan for getting, I assume you're going to use single-phase power out there? Three-phase power is what I'm looking at in the audience. So that is more expensive, and then who's going to pay for it, and how, what do they have coming up to High Plains? I know they have electricity out there, but how are they going to install that, pay for it?
So, Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek, I may let Mr. Brown address that when it comes to that, how they will pay for it and so on. Getting power to your site according to your plan is part of the development costs. It doesn't come with a condition or anything in a rezone. We just will pay for getting power out there. That will be part of the lot cost after the purchase.
Okay. And then I have a question, Dan, if you could go back and give the aerial of the High Plains subdivision along with this. It's a colored map, and I'm not sure what exhibit that is because there's so much information.
I have the aerials right here.
So it shows the High Plains, and where I'm...
Kind of exhibit 4F.
Okay, let's take a look at that. And my question has to do with your comment, Mr. Lakey, that there's a demand for these larger parcels, and that I understand that demand is an ebb and a flow on different sizes, and you're saying 4F is the ticket for us?
4A might. Yeah. Well, now. 4F might. Yeah.
Okay. How many vacant lots are there? Because those are larger parcels in that high desert, and I'm assuming they're commensurate. That's what the staff report said. How many vacant lots are still in there, and how long has that subdivision been in existence?
The subdivision of the... Sorry. Yeah, no, sure. I don't know. She was looking at me.
I'm just trying to get the exhibit, so, yeah.
Sure, Commissioner Van Beek, I believe the subdivision was done in about 2004.
Okay.
And that's as far as how many property owners on multiple lots or who owns the lots, the developer doesn't own any more lots. They've all been sold, I believe, to private parties. Their plans to do what with them, I don't know.
Okay, so that has answered the question, though. Those lots are not on the open market. All of those lots in there are sold.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek, I don't know that if there's a real estate sign up or whatever on a particular lot, but they all have been sold from the development.
Okay, and then I have one more question. I'm still confused about the aggregate and the road and the commitment on the part of the developer. What I heard you say, well, I'm hearing a couple of things, so that's why I'm asking for clarification, that the suggestion was that the whole road be in conformity, and if that's true, it would seem that the road would be torn out and rebuilt according to county standards so that it was consistent from the west side of that to where that terminates on the east side. Is that what you're saying?
Madam Chairman and Commissioner Van Beek, so what we're proposing is not to utilize the suggested condition that the mail is going to be provided in a late exhibit and simply comply with the ordinance. So compliance with the ordinance is the bottom line. What it allows, it has your standard sub-base ballots, plant mix, with those kind of things are built in there, and it provides for different types of material and thicknesses. But at the end of the day, note 4 states that it's really about the R value. Those things meet the R value, but there's different ways to meet that R value. I'll specifically reference it without reading the very long formula. It says the structural section of a private road shall be in accordance with the minimum section thicknesses as indicated in the table. Intersections of private roads may be possible based on a traffic index proposed by the applicant and reviewed by the county engineer. An R value, ITD method T8 determined during a geotechnical investigation. And then it lays out this paragraph-long formula.
And I'm sorry, would the R value, can you define that? Is it just the rubric that they use for determining what needs to be installed for the road?
Madam Chairman and Commissioner Van Beek, yes, essentially. So what that could mean, maybe we do a little bit less road base and a little bit more sub base, or a thicker top portion. I anticipate, you could meet the R value, and I'm totally just guessing because I'm not an engineer, with 4 inches of concrete versus, asphalt and sub base. So what the Note 4 allows you to do is do a geotechnical analysis and say, okay, here's what you have in the road, or here's what you need to do to meet that R value, and maybe a little bit of a deviation between those listed items.
So what's going to happen is going to be based on the geotechnical report. It may mean tearing it out. It may mean leaving a portion of it in and filling in around that. I see head nodding in the back.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Van Beek, yes. Especially on the existing Shallow portion, I would say that our goal is to try to avoid not having to take it all out and put it all back in. But at the end of the day, we'll comply with the ordinance and do what we have to do.
Okay.
And the new one will certainly be built to county standards.
Okay. And my only concern in asking the question and understanding how you're going to derive at what needs to be done, generally a minimum standard is the very least that should be done, but it may not over the long haul be the best. And so I'm just trying to get maybe at what's longevity and then in the best interest of an additional development out there. So thank you for providing that information.
Sure. Chair and Commissioner, I think I might just respond to that comment as well. As I mentioned before, we're taking the ag use off of it, so the heavy equipment things won't be passing. And the standard, was designed, I would say, generally probably with something less than 9-acre parcels as far as the density on a private road. So we're a lot less intense use than perhaps a higher number of lots would be on a private road. That's just kind of calculating thought about the standard. But that being, Madam Chair and Commissioner, I think we'll meet the standard.
Okay. Madam Chair.
1 second. I'm not sure, the intensity is probably quite small for the agricultural use since it's landlocked. And so I think that the argument would probably be that 20 homes generating, I think it's how many trips per day per home is the calculation.
9.52.
Per home is a lot higher frequency than how often the farmer might take equipment down the road.
Madam Chair, it's not so much about the frequency, what drives the impact on that road. Something that's much heavier, it's like chapter percent studies, but the weight of what's crossing the road has a much more negative impact than a lot of, or a higher number of lighter.
Do you know what has historically been grown on the property and what equipment and the weight typically look like? I just don't like making assumptions that it's a higher use. I know lots of farming and there's there's small equipment and big equipment.
Sure. Madam Chair, I can let you around that story using our.
Okay.
So I understand it. Larger equipment.
Okay. One more question, Madam Chair, and it relates to the Canyon Highway District 4 letter. It's Exhibit 5D. So on that, what Mr. Hopper, who's the professional engineer for the Canyon Highway District 4, references is that available information can be found on their website that relates to the development. Does that mean that there's additional restrictions that could be applied to this development that are outside of their general, their access, and their traffic and mitigation impact statements in this letter?
Chair, you asking?
I'm asking whoever wants to field the question.
I'll start, and Mr. still wants to respond, but my understanding was that their standard for a traffic impact study for additional improvements.
Okay, and they're referencing their transportation master plan. I did go on their website, and I was a little bit lost. If we're looking to dig that out, I have no idea how to do that.
So, the chair, they always add to all their letters basically saying they they will base further assessment on what they see later, and so they could ask for a TIS later based on more information. But as of just an overview of the rezone, it's off a private road. The private road already has a paved apron onto Emmett, so it meets their requirements. And based on the number of housing being proposed, they don't see that this would need a TIS study. But at the time of planning, they could ask for it.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. This goes back to the other agency comments that as they get into it and there's something to prove up, they'll have to provide additional or meet additional requirements. Thank you.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Reddy, yes, we understand that. We're fine.
All right. Any additional questions for Mr. Linke?
Okay, thank you, Commissioners.
Would anyone indulge me in like a 2-minute break?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, how are you? That is, I know what I wanted to ask. Eventually, none of this will be on federal land.
No, it's just adjacent to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think their concern is some of the north, about this they won't go over.
Yes.
And things like how are they going to protect?
Yeah.
So that's what they're saying at the time of planning. They want to see it to make sure it's protected.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Water.
All right. Yeah. All right. Probably. Hey, Dan. I sent those pictures to your email just now.
Okay, cool.
I also sent it to all three pictures.
Okay, cool.
The pictures of the flood behind my house and stuff, I had them sent to all three of you and on your emails.
Oh.
So,
Yes, ma'am.
print them out and make that.
Yes, you should be getting them.
15 or 16.
Nathan, are you on the line?
One we just got.
Oh, we got Holly Miles.
Nathan Cohn?
I was going to see if you wanted to testify, but I can't get a response either way. Oh, he's muted.
Oh. One second. Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah. Take a draw.
How are you?
Thank
you.
I'm good. I have a kid going back up to college, so yeah, we're trying to figure out how their orthodontist appointment with all that stuff.
the stresses
Of parenting.
lovely,
Remember me?
I know.
good memories later, but during the time,
So he drove down yesterday, he got here about 5 o'clock to make the orthodontist appointment this morning at 10, so then he left.
For my sneezing.
I'm like, I had
He's going fast. He just comes out for an appointment, kind of like a song, only in one. That's kind of cool, though.
all that driving, no, I
It's so
don't.
pretty, though. Does he go 95, you know, 100 and all?
Yeah.
Oh,
Just, I don't know, there was a girl that was killed last year.
oh, I remember, yeah. Should have it, well, I don't know, it's been 35 years.
You're on, man. All right. It is 11:26 and we are back on the record. And, I've met my quota for sitting for just a little bit, so sorry, indulge me as I stand. The worst part of my job is sitting there for that long. So at this point, we are gonna move on to, additional testimony in favor. Do you guys have a preferred order? Matt? Matt Drown? Okay, come on up. You all have 3 minutes of non-repetitive testimony. Name and address for the record. Yep.
Matt Drown, 2150 West Pacific Ridge Street, Eagle, Idaho. And I represent the landowner. It's actually my family that owns the property. We've owned it since about 2006. And we've gone through a number of different kind of farming solutions, including finding 5 different farm users, anywhere from dry grazing to potato use. And I think the longest use was the Lamy family. They tried to make it work with the well, deep water well, and it's very sandy soil out there. You may know that. And we had the hand lines and wheel lines. We looked into a pivot solution that, because of the long rectangular nature of the property and the topography, was very, very expensive and could not figure out how to make that economically work. We went from there to working with the Mike Wagner, who most recently just farmed to keep the weeds down, and there's complaints from the neighbors. We also had complaints from the neighbors on the road use, and there were very heavy trucks using this road, semis, all different types of equipment. As you know, farming doesn't stop, when it's dark. They were moving things in and out of there during the dark. You had complaints from neighboring users with the hobby farms on aerial spraying, when they have the organic farm next to them, and there was the spraying being done by the farmers. We also had to work most recently with the farmers to make sure they only spray during a certain time and keep a certain distance away. So I think we've been a really good neighbor, and it's a very, very difficult location for a farm, topography for a farm. A couple other questions real quick I can answer. There's a road will not go through. That can just be an easement, like a cul-de-sac. There is access for the littles, but that's it. And it's through an easement. And then the three-phase power question is already there. It's running the well, and that three-phase power is extended through the whole site. So that's all available. I think what we've tried to do is really, from the inception of this project, is make it complementary to what's already out there. Didn't push density, trying to match what was going on. We've had multiple neighborhood meetings, including the most recent one where we went above and beyond and had an in-person meeting in the neighborhood cul-de-sac that only a few people showed up. So hopefully we've designed something that works for the existing community to just make it complementary. So it's a very difficult process.
Any questions for Mr. Drum?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Van Beek?
what did Mr. Wagner grow out there?
I don't know. It was beans. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he had no interest in either purchasing the property. They're large-scale farmers, and I'm sure that you know that, but there was no interest from his side in keeping that in his ag portfolio.
No, and he didn't pay any rent, by the way. He did it just to keep down the weeds. I asked him to get involved after Russ Frisbee, who farmed for 2 years, gave up on it. And before that, Russ Frisbee, Tim Laney gave up on it, just said, I can't make it.
Okay, and how much of the ground is sloped?
There's about, I don't know exactly, but I believe there's about 90 acres that's farmable, about the 190, and we've got 100 shares of water that go with the property.
Okay, and so 100 acres has a slope on it, is that what you heard?
I don't know that number exactly, but I think it's in that neighborhood where there's slopes, it's not farmable. It's just
Tough to get.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner White? Phone.
I'm sorry?
Your microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry to go back to the water rights. Do those stay, like a development agreement will go with the land? Okay, do the water rights stay with the land? So you have 100 shares. So as you sell those to the people that buy that 8.5 acres or something, it stays with that land when and if they decide to go.
Yes, that is correct. And it will be split up in proportion to each 8.5 acre lot, and will go with land. It won't be sold separately, but will be sold with the lot.
With the lot.
So we'll convey that each one of the lots as they get recorded, and it will definitely stay with that lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek?
Is there a ditch company that's managing your water right and shares, or does that come right from IDWR?
Right from IDWR.
Okay.
Water right here.
Okay.
Deep water well rights, and they're around about 300 feet. It does collect sand, and it's very, very fine sand, so farmers try to irrigate and color the novels.
And I can provide support for that. We knew the reeds out there, and they have an arena with horses, and it's perfect for that use. It would be tough on a different scale. Thank you.
Would you guys be, is it economically feasible to include the wells so that you can do a pressurized irrigation system as part of the subdivision?
Each one, how that would work typically, and this is before I answer the question, but each individual homeowner will drill their own well and pressurize the irrigation system based upon that well. That well could stay there, and we're looking into having it be pressurized to provide fire flow. If we can split that water, we'll be addressing that a little bit later, so that we can actually potentially have that be an amenity and part of our well farm plan. We don't know how that actually works yet, but each one of the individual 4 lots that would be developed would have pressurized irrigation based upon their own well, and that's how they irrigate the farm.
Typically, those irrigation plans get reviewed at the subdivision process, and if we wait until they put in individual wells, then there's not a review process for those irrigation plans. So are you opposed if there was a condition that would require, because you could pass that cost along anyways, they have to buy wells anyways. Is that even feasible?
I don't think that works with the water. I'm not sure that works with the water rate, because you have to adjudicate the water rate each one of the, and I think your point of the solution has to change to each one of the individual lots. So you couldn't, I guess, unless you have, we'd have to look into that. I don't think it's possible.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek?
Mr. Drown, you were the original owner when this didn't go through the last time when there was an application, or no?
We were not. We were a passive investor. It was actually my mother-in-law that as a passive investor, the original developer that ended up losing the property. She stepped up and paid off all the debt, and I became managing the property to figure out how to best use this site, the farming operation. We knew that it was planned already, at least from the CCNR's perspective, always, and that individual owners knew that there could be something there in the future. And that's when we evolved through this process to come up with something that we thought was very complementary with the hobby farm, 8.5 acre parcels that weren't going to push density and weren't going to create a negative impact of more than what the farm was to some of these existing homeowners. For the 8.5 acre lot.
Okay, and what is the width, north or south, of that? You've got a rectangular shaped piece, you've got 190 acres, but how wide is that along that? Okay, that's what I was interested. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Drown?
Well, I guess just whoever can field the question. So if you have a quarter of a mile from north to south, you have a road easement somewhere in there that you have to account for because it goes through the subdivision. So I guess address the concern from neighbors that their frontage wouldn't be taken away. So what does that look like?
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the road right away?
Well, whatever that encompasses, I've actually got two questions in there, which I'm trying not to do, but the depth of the lot, if you have to take out for a road from north to south, so from the northern boundary to the road, and then you've got the road, and then from the northern boundary to the southern boundary of that.
The existing road.
Well, there's no road out there right now, right? On that lot, that 190 acres?
No, there is no, there's a farm road on the very, very north side.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, that's okay. Let's jump to your, what you're going to go through, which is the frontage and the roads for what they're concerned about.
Sure.
The neighbors.
Yeah, there's a 60-foot right-of-way
Okay.
on that roadway, and there are quite a few of the neighbors that have built their improvement within that right-of-way. It's been surveyed off, and you can see where it is. We believe, we don't know if we can do this or not, but we believe that we can stay out of messing with any of their improvements and still widen the road to 24 feet.
Okay.
And do what we need to do without having to disrupt what they, we didn't build the right of way they did. That's a public, that's a right of way that's owned.
So it's because of the narrowness of the existing road that their right of way may be impacted. So depending on how that goes forward in conformity with county standards, that's the concern.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification on that. And I guess I was just trying to figure out how deep the lots would be, how close they would be to the road if you have a quarter of a mile that separates it. Maybe.
Yeah, there's plenty of room. I think 8.5 acre parcel. There's plenty of room for that house to be set back quite a ways.
Okay, and I'm with the hillside component. I'm just trying to figure out if they're relegated to a really small parcel or. Okay.
There's plenty of room.
Okay.
Home footprint within each one of these lots is proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony. We'll move on to Alan Mills. Thank you, Mr. Mills.
Alan Mills, Box 206, Middleton, Idaho. Market demand, yes, there is a big demand for these size lots, and we don't have them in Canyon County. Good reason for that is that administrative splits don't tend to exceed 2 acres. I've never even seen one lately for 5 or 10 acre sizes. They may exist, but there's really no way to develop this size of lots without going through this process. I've known this property since the 60s. Chet Shelver brought the three-phase power up Cemetery Road to this property, and I've watched a lot of my friends at farm try it, and Mike was approached this year about would he be interested. He wouldn't commit whether he would even come in if he didn't have to pay anything for it. But as far as selling it for a farm, I don't think a farmer's going to want to take the liabilities of driving through a residential development to get to this. And then how do we deal with their proportionate share of damage to a road if they were? It takes 9,600 car trips to equal the damage to a road of one 18-wheeler. To Carrie's question, equipment tends to get bigger and bigger, not smaller and smaller, and higher impacts to roads. This also project is one of the rare ones that would not affect any other farmer. There's no other adjacent farmers at all. Can't have any isolation issues. If I was 40 years younger, this is where I'd want to be. At one time I had 9 horses. It would take every bit of one of these lots to accommodate those. Organic farming is a big thing nowadays, and people are doing that. This opens that up for them. If you want to see the impacts that this could have positively, go down to D&B for the next 3 months and see what happens there, and go to Zamzows and see how many people year-to-year increase are in there contributing to the economy. It's called hobby farming, and more people are wanting to do it. With our recent COVID and other things, people are turning their minds to those kind of things more, not less. They want to be self-sufficient. You may have to ask me questions on the irrigation here. The irrigation is one big well. It's not feasible to run a pipe from that big, huge pump and hit all these lots. And then you have a irrigation association that has to maintain it. If somebody doesn't winterize it, you all pay the price for it. So the perfect way to do this is pointed diversion changes, move those water rights to each individual lot, and then they drill a new well. It's called a pointed diversion change. The water right goes with them. And Harry's point about possibly doing it in advance, that's worth some consideration. I'm just not sure at this point how. I think you're very far.
How much more do you have left?
Oh, I got a few more.
Okay, be concise.
Okay. But if you want to ask more questions about irrigation, we have to file new rights for fire protection. The well only has an irrigation right. So we have to file a water right for fire protection and fire storage in this case. Willing to work with the fire department within any reason at all. We think the elements are there to be able to put some hydrants in. The flow is there on the existing well. It's got more than 1,500 gallon minute capacity. So could benefit the whole neighborhood. It wouldn't just benefit this, but it would benefit the existing people also to do that. And I guess I'll sit.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner White.
Thank you, Alan. The new rights for the fire protection, who then will own those?
It would be filed on the well, so the HOA.
HOA?
Water rights to the fire for fire protection.
Madam Chair.
And I did talk to the water department, and they seem more than willing to give a fire protection water right.
Commissioner Van Beek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Alan, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to review the exhibits that have been submitted by Mr. Craig. And what it shows is that there's flooding on this property. So as we have a conversation with the fire district about identifying a potential water source, I don't know how long this water stands on the ground. That's something I guess that Mr. Craig can address. But what are your thoughts on having some kind of containment for that flood event that could be maybe used for fire suppression, something, I mean, is that possible?
I don't think that's by any means as using the existing known source, which is the well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know. So the second,
you could rely on that. That's a Mother Nature thing.
Mm-hmm. So the second part of that question, though, have they talked about how to get everything to drain to a certain point, just a retention pond, something? I guess that's what I understood the chair to say, that the funds ran out and this is a floodplain and here's flooding in the area, but how do we contain when there's a flash flood event? What happens with that?
That would be more of an engineering situation. I think that would come up prior to the preliminary plan. Be worked through on that process.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that.
That's fine. Madam Chair, one more question. And Alan, you have a long and great history as a realtor. Do you know if there are properties for sale in the High Desert Subdivision, or are they all under private ownership and they're holding their ground because they love it there?
I am not aware of any, but there could be, but I haven't seen any.
Okay, thank you.
For the record, High Plains Estates, not High Desert.
Thank you.
What you meant, right?
Yep.
Do you know if there are more than 75 large pieces of equipment that cross that road every year?
That use which road,
Chilocco?
75?
That's high.
That would be crop dependent, and it would certainly exceed that in some crops.
Okay.
Yeah, grain, for instance, just winter wheat.
Where did you get your statistics on that, on the vehicle uses versus?
National Transportation Department.
Like on their website?
I heard it and learned it and read it 25 years ago, so I don't know about websites. I don't look at it.
I think updated stats on that would be helpful.
Well, again,
Me and you might have to look that up,
equipment
Alan.
gets bigger, not smaller.
They do get bigger. It's true.
Except the cars now. I got a big little pro there. Cars get smaller.
Yeah.
So it's only more nice.
Okay. I don't think there's any additional questions. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you. The last person signed up for testimony in favor is our online participant, Kevin McCarthy. You have been unmuted.
Yeah, again, I was online to answer any engineering related questions. And so if there's any, I'd be happy to answer. But otherwise, I think the testimony that everyone else has covered it.
Okay. All right. We will move on to testimony in neutral, which is Darren Taylor. Since you represent the Homeowners Association, we'll give you 10 minutes for your testimony if you really need it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Darren Taylor, Subdivision Maker LLC, 1434 New York Street, Middleton, Idaho. I am here today on behalf of the High Plains Estates Homeowners Association, Inc. It includes about 14 parcels that were developed administratively in 2004. Lot 14, or parcel 14, is the subject property which the applicants are seeking to re-subdivide into additional lots. The CCNRs included two provisions. One that says, no parcels shall be further subdivided. And then there was this... Yeah, you're looking at the CCNRs, right from. And then there was that entire paragraph that the applicants, Mr. Lakey read, that actually talked about re-subdivision of parcel 14. So please understand the difference. One is that the 13 or 12 existing parcels were contemplated to not be subject to further subdivision. Two parcels actually were, and they were called out by one was parcel 14 and one was that 20-acre one that the developers lived in, parcel 20. So, both.
Can you show me parcel 20?
Yes. If you'll pause my time.
Oh, I did it. I could have broke the whole system. Nervous.
So I'm looking at this diagram. In parcel 14, the subject property is the northeast.
Do you know for the record what exhibit that's included?
It's there. So, number 14 is at the bottom.
Okay.
Represents the lot. Then 20 is up there.
So this is exhibit 8? Okay. For the record, thank you.
So parcel 14 is the northeast, that's the subject property of today's hearing. Parcel 20 that I mentioned is owned by the developer, that's the southwest down here is the 20th parcel.
Okay, your interpretation of the CCNR, those two lots were excluded from the further development.
They were excluded from the restriction against further development because they were owned by the developer.
Okay. Oh, see? I messed it up.
Fix it. Do you know about how far?
Okay, I'll fix it. Thank you.
End of the day, I'm going to go ahead and keep talking. An essential finding of fact, the Homeowners Association request is that Chilocco Street be a legal, non-conforming road. So please include that in your finding of fact.
That it's a legal, non-conforming road.
Non-conforming road, that it's legally there.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Van Beek.
I'm trying to understand the implications of your statement. So are you suggesting then that it should stand and not require further improvements from the developer?
No, I'm confirming what the staff said. We can pause my time for questions if you want.
And she did.
That staff just said that because the road is there, it was there with permission of the county at the time it was built. But it does not meet today's standards. So that's called a non-conforming use.
Okay.
And for any additional use, i.e. subdivision of this parcel 14, then the non-conforming components of that use of the road would need to come into conformance.
Okay.
So by my statement, I'm confirming what staff said at the same. A really clear, good way to include that is that finding of fact.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
But to clean that up, staff didn't make that finding. That finding is from Exhibit 12, which includes the determination from All West, the company All West that provided the samples. So I think that the finding, when you guys rework up the findings, that is a fair finding that per Exhibit 12. Chilocco does not meet current road standards. Okay, we're gonna start you again, and then we're gonna hold questions till you're in. Sorry, I started it, my fault.
No worries at all. So there was a question by the Madam Chair about previous agreements and amendments. There are no written agreements between the HOA and the applicant. There are a series of emails that use the word, we agree to this, or we'll agree to this. So please know that there's just nothing official other than just some written documents that both parties are relying on. Mr. Lakey today stated that parcel 14 would be subject to the CCNRs, including assessments, the architectural review committee, and private road maintenance proportionate to the number of lots. So there are 20 lots now, the parcels now, they're going to add 14 or whatever it is, then there will be 34 in the future paying for that road maintenance. So the HOA concurs with the statements Mr. Lakey made on that subject. The subject about the condition of the road, it is in good condition. However, it does not have any pit run underneath it. And so the HOA does agree that the best condition is one which just says, and it's not even a condition, they'll comply with the ordinance as it's written. So that's the right standard. The HOA does request a couple of conditions. One was alluded to earlier. Some existing landowners constructed fences or built landscaping or have trees in the Chilocco Lane or Chilocco Street right of way. I said right of way, wrong word. 60-foot easement is privately owned and maintained. Privately owned and maintained, 60-foot wide. Some landowners planted trees and built fences in it. We marked their north property boundaries, and even with those markings, the applicants recognize that they can widen the surface pavement of the road to the north rather than to the south. Therefore, there would be no disturbance of the existing fences or trees put by the existing landowners. The HOA requests that the board make that a condition of approval to basically widen the existing road to the north where possible. There's been discussion about the size of lots out there. Mr. Lakey said 10 acres. The original application included an average of 8.5 acres for the parcels. Subsequent to the application, there's been discussion of the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing. HOA also confirmed that let's have a minimum parcel size at 8. And the HOA would require there be both requirements. There's a minimum parcel size of 8 and that there be 8.5 acre minimum average. It actually accomplished two different things. Finally, two more. Stormwater should be retained on site and treated on site. The water shown in in these pictures just needs to be retained on the subject property site and be treated. We prefer natural filtration.
What if I could, you got those pictures, they don't have an exhibit number that we haven't.
Yeah, they do. They're a letter from, I just can't remember his name.
Well, do you want to just explain? So the letter states that he would provide them, but hadn't provided them, so we'll just enter them as an exhibit. 16?
Yeah, 16 hours are exhibit.
So 16, thank you.
Thank you. So we just request a condition that says stormwater shall remain on site and treated on site. natural filtration. Final comment regarding this irrigation subject, along with action clarification. Idaho Department of Water Resources allows a domestic well to be drilled to provide domestic water for that same well can have two pumps in it, one that would pump water for the irrigation. One well, irrigation pump, domestic water pump. The point of diversion that Mr. Mills was talking about would take the water rights that are in the one big irrigation water well now, and the word was used, a portion, divide that up into your number of lots, and then those water rights would be pertinent to the resulting parcel or lot.
Madam Chair, say that again.
Okay. So we've got one big water right now, and it will be divided into equal parts so that, based on acreage, equal parts for the residential lots. And instead of coming out of one hole, then that water right will actually come out of the hole that's drilled on each parcel for its domestic water well. And it does that by having two pumps in the well.
Madam Chair, I just want clarification. So we'll essentially remove the water right from that existing ag well and make it a pertinent with each section of land.
I'm going to concur with the second part of your sentence. It will certainly reduce that big number.
Okay.
Because it will be a bunch of smaller numbers.
Okay.
We'll all go there. I'm not sure.
Okay. And thank you for that clarification, but it takes away from one to give to the other, and then it makes it permanently a part of that land distribution.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Final comment was to Madam Chair's question. Usually we have an irrigation plan that comes with our preliminary plat. This type of irrigation is handled with a note, basically. Irrigation will be supplied by a pressurized system at the time that the domestic well is drilled. That may not be something you've seen, it might not be something you're familiar with. It's part of IDWR's rules and water right usage. I've done it, SPF Water Engineering has done it, and recommended it to me for when we've got parcels of land that are really, really hard to irrigate or have no surface irrigation.
Madam Chair.
Can we finish testimony, please? Keep coming.
So, my point is, there's not a pipe that goes throughout the subdivision that connects everybody's water irrigation water together. There's just the well that goes on the property, and there are a couple of pumps in that. They're in that pipe. One's for irrigation, one's for domestic water. Because of that, there can be an irrigation plan submitted with preliminary plat, but it's going to be pretty much a blank piece of paper showing the parcels and showing the approximate location where a well might be drilled, because you never want to make that decision for the well driller, not the guys that are experts up to what he works on with. And it will just be a note that says it will be a pressurized system. So I just want to confirm that that's how it gets pressurized. It's by a pump in the domestic well. And it's really hard to do an irrigation plan at the time you file your preliminary plat, because the well doesn't get drilled until the homeowner buys it built. But it's the water rights. So yes, final comment. The water rights can be separated out prior to a final plat, but then you have to go back and, once you get a final plat, you have to go back and redo it. So you're doubling the work for IDWR, and guess how excited they are about that. So on these types of irrigation systems, it's preferred to not divide that water right up prior to the final plat. Happy to answer any questions. I think I had about 4 or 5 conditions that we requested when we did that.
Okay, Commissioner Van Beek.
Madam Chair, thank you. So when you're talking about 2 different pumps for servicing irrigation versus domestic water, is there a depth difference? And okay, so that's engineered all in that That's an engineering question. Okay. Thank you for that. And then, can you go back to your statement that there was a difference between the 8.5 acre average and the 8 acre minimum, and why is that important?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner Demby. If we just have an 8 acre minimum, then conceivably you take the 190 acres and divide it into 8 acre parcels.
Okay.
And now you're getting a different total number of lots.
Right.
But if we say minimum of 8 and an average of 8.5, those two standards prohibit having a bunch of 8 acre parcels.
Well, and with the size of the original lot of 190 acres, there's going to be some that are substantially bigger because of the hillside in there. Okay, thank you for that. And then, would you go back and pick up your comments on the natural filtration to retain water?
Yeah, so stormwater, EPA and DEQ prefer the water to be treated by natural filtration to percolate through the soil, as it's always done. Engineers design stormwater treatment, is what they call it, the way they clean stormwater, different systems. And we don't want to tell an engineer how to do stormwater treatment. My comment just was that stormwater should be retained on site and not leave that property boundary and go on to some of the existing landowner property. And then we recognize the desirability of natural filtration as a treatment, as opposed to mechanical or any of that type of stuff.
Madam Chair. And so with that, I understand, I think, what you're saying. It seems to me, given the testimony that's been put on record, that because this is sandy soil, that there would be a process where that would dissipate, but we have standing water on here. So are you proposing then that there would have to be enhancements to make that natural filtration happen?
No, Madam Chair and Commissioner Levy, great question, because that is the exact issue. If we've got standing water, that means we don't have porous soils and sufficient to drain this within the time frame that is usually the standard for stormwater treatment. And so I don't know how the project engineers want to work that out, but we do recognize the fact that natural filtration is that. And that soil's not doing it, so there might need to be some drenching, some soil change out, whatever the engineers decide.
Okay, and is that...
Please disregard my comment about natural filtration. I was just trying to affirm that the HOA sees that as a viable use out here, and we support DEQ and EPA. That is the preferred method of treatment, as opposed to some mechanical and chemical, which we don't want anything else. Let's just fix the soil so that it actually drains.
And I have one more question, Madam Chair. When we're talking about the average 8.5 acre parcel size, how do you get around irrigating that if the IDWR standard for a residence is a half acre of foot water?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner, that'd be a great question. Once again, you've got two pumps in your well, and they are separated. The domestic water usually comes to the lower of the two. If, by state law, the water that comes out of that pump is limited to 1/2 acre of land, this other pump does not have that same statutory restriction. It's not used for domestic use.
Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Did any of the homeowners ever talk about access to the LM grounds through the subdivision?
Not with me.
Will you come back and give a rebuttal on that too? Sorry, I just thought of it. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you for being prepared in the level of detail. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Before you leave, just one last question. If it's your understanding, because you do a lot of CCNRs, that these CCNRs could easily be amended to include the new subdivision? Or will it have to be its own separate CCNRs?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good question. These CCNRs do not need to be amended to include parcel 14. Because it already did. This property is already subject to the CCNR. And that means the CCNRs as written, including the architectural committee, the assessments, and the private road maintenance obligation on a pro rata share, except for the initial, any work that needs to be done in county standards at the time of development. That's not a legitimate.
So, for title reasons, when the new subdivision gets recorded, it'll just reference this instrument number?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. That completes neutral testimony. And we will move. Oh, actually, we do have additional neutral testimony. It was provided online on the WebEx chat feature, and Monica's going to read that into the record.
This comment's from Nathan Cohn. It states, I do not need to make comment. I'm neutral as long as the development is done by the book. For example, impact mitigation recommendation for the existing portion, Shawako Road, from licensed Idaho engineer with supporting geotechnical investigation. No overhead power / phone lines running from Emmett Road to the new development. I'm also curious if 20 additional wells would affect the existing wells of the adjacent property owners.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Van Beek?
if we could have Mr. Lakey address that comment, that would be a different scenario to have buried power lines, so overhead versus buried. If he could just address that and how the applicant feels about that, that would be great.
Okay. We will move into testimony in opposition. And just for the record, I found a really cool feature on my iPad so we can watch our testimony in opposition online now too. It's kind of fun. I like technology. So, Mr. Craig, you are up. You are in the hot seat. You will have 3 minutes of testimony.
Okay, Commissioner, thank you. Commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to rebut some stuff. Obviously, the roads have been beaten
Name
down.
and address for the record, sorry.
Roger Craig, 11509 Shawako Road, Caldwell, Idaho, 83607. I actually am the house on the map right next to the first lot you would come to. So obviously the road issues have been beat to death. Of course, you know, I don't know why it was denied back in 2006, but I would imagine it would be denied for the same reasons. I don't know if the road can handle the traffic. I've lived there for 15 years, and as Mr. Lakey says, experience is the best. So living out there for 15 years, I can tell you a lot about this property. I've four-wheeled all over this thing. I know it pretty well. But I do know the road is not built to standards because we have had to repave it or resurface it. I think throwing an extra 2 inches or whatever, I'm not a road expert, so I'm not going to even pretend to be one. But whatever the proposition was made didn't seem to hold water for us. I think that at least the road should be brought to standards, as Mr. Lister has said, and I guess the road department said it should be. Some of my biggest problems with water issues, obviously you see the pictures that I took, that is behind my shop. Some of that is from irrigation. There is almost an acre of water laying out there. It is relatively deep. My Ford F-250 cannot make it through it. If it tells you anything, it will bottom out in there. That water, we built dams along the way. It did flood my parcel and Tim Hogan's parcel, which would be the next one over for me. I think Tim and I have had to replace a total of about 70 to 80 fence posts from water rot over the last year. There was about an inch of water over both of our pastures. It's coming from this. The reality is that any water, anytime it rains or anything, it has nowhere to go. So it comes on our property. It has nowhere to go when it's barren like this. And my concern is you start developing these lots close to me are going to have the same problem I am, but it's even going to go further. I don't know how you make water run uphill. There's engineers that know how to do that. I do know water because I used to be a pool contractor. However they figure it out, I don't know where it's going to go because we call them ditches down south. You guys call them burrow pits or something. But the ones that run down the side, they don't seem to be getting it because all the water goes into our property. We brought this to, I know that Mr. Hogan brought it to Mr. Drown's attention about this, and we dealt with this. We deal with it every summer or whenever it snows a lot and then it melts. like I said, the water has nowhere to go. So, I know that's going to be an issue. I'm trying to hurry. I'm running out of time. Some of the other issues, wildlife, I guess that's been addressed because for whatever reason, the wildlife department don't want to get involved in that. I don't know what the standards are in this state. I know in other states they do, but because I've had that issue building pools before. But I do know there's a lot out there. I do know this will impact it. I've ridden my four-wheelers. I know most of the neighbors ride their horses out there. There's a lot out there. The problem is that when they put our neighborhood in, it pushed a lot of that wildlife into this area. And on the other side, Mr. Little grazes his cows, and that pushes it. And for a lot of this wildlife, that's their only safe haven. Everything up above is wide open. So there's a lot of nesting, a lot of stuff goes on in that area out there because that is their only safe haven, plus the little sagebrush that's out there. But that's, once again, that's not my expertise. I'm an average guy. I'm out there riding around and I see it. I see all these critters running around and I know they have nowhere to go. The deer come down there to hide, the predators, everything comes in there to hide.
Can you, on Exhibit 2, there is a blue line on the north side of the closest to Chilocco, and then there's another dotted blue line indicating some of that floodplain, and then there's an exhibit in our file, Exhibit 4D, that shows the floodplain. Dan, can you pull that exhibit up? And my question, I want to know if where you're seeing this water, if it follows the floodplain map.
Pretty much, Commissioner Smith, it does. It runs right through where that is. It seems to have gotten a little bit more excessive over the years for whatever reason. It just happened to catch my house. That's why I have such a flood insurance. But it's right in that area. I don't know if the other neighbors have caught it. They still seem to catch the flood water. I'm not sure if the Bruners have got any of that or not. It would be the one at the bottom, down to the bottom, kind of the one that sits by itself. But I do know myself and Tim Hogan, we get the brunt of that. So I have to assume that all the rest of these lots in here are just going to get a ton of water because it just runs through there and just creates a flood right through that valley.
So on your Exhibit 16 that shows the photos of the flooding, have you followed this water to see where it ends?
Well, okay, so it's dammed up right there. Now we have to do it because if not, my pasture could only take so much because we have cows out there. So we can only take so much of it, so we have to let a little bit out and then it would fill up, let a little bit out and fill up. Because if it sits there, the mosquitoes are unbearable. And I was worried about it breaching the thing and coming into my shop right there. And I got a lot of equipment that I didn't want to get damaged. So we ran it down and we would bust it open at the end, because if you don't, it'll just sit there and build up and eventually it will come over on its own and then it'll bust up. The farmer tried to put a dam there to block it up, but eventually, as you know, water will find its way, and once it does, it just wipes out. And then all of a sudden we wake up one morning and the water would be all up in my yard, mud, everything.
On Exhibit 2, can you identify where the dam is?
Is this exhibit? Pretty much.
Pointer?
Sure. And I will take an eye out with it.
Well, yeah, push the top and then it'll turn on. And then you gotta at least speak into this or over there.
Okay. So it's right, see where the top blue line is? Right here. Right where the blue line is, the top one? It runs right down to that corner. And then it does run right through here. So all of this is pretty much flooded.
So, and it's a man-made dam?
Well, yeah, the farmer put it up to try to help me.
How long ago?
The last couple of years we've had to do it. It's pretty much a yearly thing. It's just a berm. We just put the dirt up to try to keep it from, because it gets unbelievable. The mosquitoes are just ridiculous. Fortunately, I found something to take care of that. But the whole pasture pretty much floods. And if you don't do that, it backs way up. It backs up pretty soon, and then it builds up. Like I said, the picture, that's close to an acre of water sitting there. It's pretty deep.
Well, for the record, the water is flowing from east to west. So they're damming it so that it doesn't come, they're damming it.
They're trying to minimize how much water comes through there. That's us. So the farmer and I, I think Mr. Brown talked to him about trying to block that water too. I think it was a concerted effort because we've dealt with it. Used to they ran cows, but it was no big deal. But then when they started farming it, it became an issue. And they said, well, it's because they ran the roads the wrong way. No, that's not it. They've done them both ways, and I've had that issue. There's no place for that water to go. It funnels right through there.
So, but can you confirm, does it flow from east to west?
Yes.
And then for the record, and I hate saying this, I'm sure that dam was not permitted, and we would have to figure that out. That's the problem.
It was just dirt to try to block the water from just overtaking us.
Makes sense.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek.
Mr. Craig, did you have any conversation with the developer about the proposal to replace some of the soils that would make that more permeable in that area?
Not the soils. We did contact Matt about replacing the fence posts and just trying to be a good neighbor because I'm sure you know to replace 30 or 40 between 70, 80 fence posts. Mm-hmm. Not only is it expensive, it's a lot of work.
Right.
But I personally didn't talk to him, but I know Tim Hogan did. From my understanding, he told me he did, and we didn't really receive any.
Okay.
That's according to Mr. Hogan. I can't personally say that I talked to Mr. Brown.
Thank you for that. So, Mr. Lakey, can you address that, whether or not there was a conversation, and if there would be a willingness, and it would benefit, it appears that the proposed subdivision would benefit from having some mitigation efforts to create a porous soil, as Mr. Taylor has indicated for the record, to help with that flood issue. If there was a proposal, Mr. Craig, that would help manage the water flow that comes to your property and in that subdivision, is that something that would help you feel any more comfortable with 20 more homes locating there?
I mean, every little bit helps, but, and I know my time's up, but there's also another issue, if I could just state it real quick.
Really quick.
Yes, ma'am. So in our neighborhood, there's 2 lots that are still undeveloped. So a lot of people think it's great to go get 8, 10 acres of land. We've all had it. It's not easy to maintain. So the problem we have is I've seen this, the developers go in, they develop the land and they're done, and it's not taken care of. So when it's not taken care of, you have an overgrow of weeds and stuff. So in our neighborhood, for instance, we've got 2 lots that are still undeveloped. So what makes you think all these 20 lots are going to get developed real quick? They might sell, but are they going to get developed? And that's the issue. So it is a real pain for us. Just those 2 lots undeveloped, you cannot imagine the tumbleweed and the issues we have with those 2 lots. Now, the owners try to do their best, but it really affects us.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek.
So can you answer the question then? I've asked 3 different entities, and you're the closest to it. Are those lots for sale and they're not selling? Or are they privately owned, and are the weeds a problem for the homeowner not providing mitigation?
Okay, so at the point, I believe the lots are sold, but they have been up for sale. I think they've turned over a few times because, once again, everybody thinks it's great to own 9, 10 acres, and you get out there and start to take care of it, and it's like, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
Yes, ma'am. And that's my concern with it. I'm not saying these people won't take care of it, but it's the lots that don't sell. They'll go buy them as investment or whatever, but they sit there. And there needs to be some maintenance on those, and generally that doesn't take place.
Is High Plains, do you each have your own water right as proposed for the subdivision?
Yes, ma'am.
So you guys installed something similar to what Mr. Mills or Mr. Taylor alluded to? You have 2.
I'm thinking they did. We have a well, and I think it's, Mr. Mills would know this for sure, but is it 70%? We're on 70 or 78%. It's a number that we're allowed to irrigate, and the other we can't. And some people have 2 pumps, some don't. Some strictly have their well water. Some people have dropped them because we irrigate the cows or whatever the case may be. We want to irrigate the pasture. So I don't really, I don't know what everybody's L-size pumps are. I know what mine is, and we dropped the secondary one, and I know my neighbors have done that for that reason. Because I was dumb enough to put 2 acres. Well? Yes, ma'am. I was dumb enough to put 2 acres of lawn in my house, so I needed that extra irrigation. At the time, it was a great idea, but yeah. So yes, ma'am, that is the case. against me, but I have a few other points I wanted to make that are just rebuttal to some of the stuff.
Madam Chair, he's here. I'm happy to hear it.
So just a couple things that.
I'm going to give you 1 minute, and you got to get them done in 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay. Here you
A couple
go.
of little things. I do respect Mr. Mills saying that it's an economic input to the community, but also question the economic input against the community for the schools. You commissioners may not know this, but the closest bus stop for these kids is 1.5 miles away on Hollow Road because the buses will not come down that private road. So most of us have to take our kids over there because they cannot walk across Hollow Road or Emmett Road because of the danger, especially the young ones. It's an extreme inconvenience. It has caused problems with the bus community in the Middleton School District, and as we know, it's busting at the seams already. So I would argue that they might go buy a bunch of fertilizer, but they're killing the school system in there. There's a responsibility I think we have to the community on that. Just because the ground's not farmable or doesn't do good farming doesn't mean it needs to be developed. Maybe we can find something else to do with it. Wildlife, cows, it always do well with cows. But we don't develop every piece of farmland that doesn't farm well.
Madam Chair, I have just one question. What made you decide to move out there?
Well, we moved here from Florida, and we like the privacy, we like the acreage, and we did enjoy it. When you have 4 kids and you got all that stuff, it's great, but as you get older, you want to start downsizing. I can testify it's a lot of work. I do enjoy it out there. I enjoy the peace and quiet, and I enjoy the community. We're a really good community out there. We look out for each other, and it's a nice place to live out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And were you aware that when you purchased it, the CCNR said that it would be expanded?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you, no. At the time, the other development was trying to get in, and one of the neighbors came over and told us. That was after I purchased the land. But, I was not shown that. But it didn't go through. I think there's a lot of reasons why it didn't go through, and I think there's a lot of reasons why this shouldn't go through. It's not just a money thing. There's a lot of value to that land staying like it is, like I said. And yes, it's easy for me to say that because I'm going to be the one most impacted by it. But I think as a community, everybody's going to be impacted by it. And I think as our neighborhood, we're going to be impacted by it. I think long term, saving little pieces like this will all be impacted by it. I just don't see the opportunity with the water issues and things like that and what could be possibly in this area. It's the only area for some of this habitat to be. Why we have to push it even further out.
Okay. Thanks for your testimony today.
Okay. And I appreciate the questions for the opportunity.
Absolutely. The next person signed up to testify in opposition is James Blacker. Please state your name and address for the record, and then I would encourage you to not have repetitive testimony and just say that you confer with other testimony given if you do have repetitive testimony.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
James Blacker, 28872 Cahill Way, Caldwell, 83607. I'm one of the residents in High Plains Estate. And it is very unique and a special piece of land as it fingers into the BLM. I've never come across anything that you pretty much protected for any potential future growth. And so, yeah, I would concur with Mr. Craig's testimony about the unique specialness of this area, and that it would be great to be able to minimize any impact possible. As far as the abundance of wildlife, that's one of the things that brought my wife and now 2 kids to live out there is that we live in the middle of almost a nature reserve. We have many different exotic birds. Many of them look like my little girl calls them dinosaurs. It's just a magical place, and again, I just want to say how great it is to live out there. However, it does have some concerns. One of the concerns we had when I bought the property is that it only had one entrance, and we're locked in there by the BLM. And so that was one of the concerns I had moving in. It's like, okay, if something happens at the entrance, if there's a medical emergency, if there's something that we need to get out, how do we get out fast? And there is no egress route. We are locked in there, and we are surrounded by a bunch of fencing from the BLM and other private properties. And so that was a major concern. Albeit we pushed through with the purchase because of the specialness of the land. We weighed the risk reward, and we've never seen anything like this. However, moving forward, if we're going to increase the size and the population of this area to a level where we have not alleviated the core issue of the ability to get people out of the area. It is a flood, prone to flooding, but it's very dry out there. It's just a matter of time before we experience another fire, and if the fire is at a level where we're trying to get people out, where the fire department's trying to get in, those concerns, they have not been abated. I mean, they're there. So that would be something that would really help myself and my family moving forward. Now that we have this opportunity to speak at this level, what is the proposition of creating an egress route? How do we address the emergency if, in fact, we do need to get people out quickly? And then my main issue is not really the development itself, other than it would be a selfish desire to say, no, I don't want to develop. Of course I don't, because it's beautiful. But I also respect the man's ownership of property and their ability to do what he wants to remodel within the country. So I can respect what's being done and want to do it. My only concern real quick is that I would like to see it done to standards. And my main issue is the road, Chilocco Road. We've had it redressed and resurfaced one time since I've lived there since 2015. And I would not agree with the definition that the roads are in generally good condition. And I'm not a road expert, but I'm someone who has thousands and thousands of miles of road, just like the rest of us. And we know when we're on a good road and we know when we're on a bad road. If the road is bumpy and it's shaking your feelings loose a little bit, then it's probably not a good road. I guess I'll go ahead and stop right there if there's any questions.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Bee?
I have a question. I don't know if this witness can testimony to answer the question, but it was something that Mr. Taylor brought up, and it has to do with the frontage and not diminishing that. So I don't know if you have property that's in that 60-foot easement for the roadway, but maybe Mr. Lakey, I don't know. I want someone to answer that, how they can go south, because your testimony was that you were bounded by BLM ground and fencing, and so if we go north, does that interrupt the BLM property on that?
And it's specific to Chilocco Road. I do not live off Chilocco Road, so that easement that they're talking about, that would not have a direct impact to me. I think what they were speaking is that you have the center line of the road.
Right.
You can expand it either to the north, which goes into the BLM, or the BLM direction, or you can extend it to the south, which will actually get closer to the property owner.
Right.
And so I think the proposal or the request was, well, if we have to expand the road, let's try to expand it towards the BLM direction.
And so if Mr. Lakey could address that question then, because that would be an impact. BLM has a letter in there that they want to be notified of impact. So if we're going to take that easement north, then we would want to know what their response to that would be. Thank you for fielding the question.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you. We will move to testimony from those joining us via WebEx. We will unmute Mike and Melissa Wayland. Please state your name and address for the record, and which one of you is starting first?
Hello, this is Melissa Wheeland. Mike is here as well. 29122 High Plains Road, Caldwell, Idaho, 83607. We are in lot 11. We are the newest neighbors in the development, having moved into our newly built home at the end of August 2020. We purchased the lot in 2016. When we purchased the lot, we were made aware that there may be additional lots added to our neighborhood, but the details were vague. We appreciate the fact that Matt intends to make these lots comparable in size to the existing lots in our neighborhood, but we still have concerns about how these lots will be incorporated into our neighborhood and follow our CC&Rs. That being said, we do not appreciate the fact that he does not want to bring Chilocco Road up to code. Since owning our lot from 2016 to present, We have observed the condition of Shallow Road deteriorate with cracks and potholes, and we believe at least one road repair attempt similar to what Matt is proposing has already been made, but it ended up only being just a stopgap measure because the road continues to deteriorate. This is with just the traffic currently in the neighborhood, which still has 2 lots without homes on them, and our lot did not have traffic until 2020. Given the fact that the traffic on Shallow will more than double with these additional lots, we feel it is only appropriate to have Shallow Road brought completely up to code with an appropriate road base and safe width. No variance should be given to avoid bringing the road up to code. The cost of bringing this road up to code should be solely on the developer. The existing property owners should not incur the cost to improve a road just so the developer can make a profit on the sale of his property and leave the current and future property owners having to repair a subpar road in the very near future at our expense. Also have similar concerns to other testimony on the secondary emergency access, which has its pros and cons. One of the cons being that could be a through access for commuters from Emmett if there was some alternate egress. Also with the speed on the road, there's already been concerns on Shallow with the speed. Some kind of issues to mitigate those long stretches of road we would be interested in. And then additionally, we would like to know what will happen to the existing well that is currently being used for farming irrigation, along the same lines of other testimony. What is the current impact on the additional, with additional wells on the lot? What will that well be used, or will it be capped? And that's all we have.
Any questions for Melissa? All right, Melissa, was your testimony for you and Mike?
I believe Mike has a little he wants to say as well.
Okay, we do not have any additional questions for you, and Mike, if you can state your name and address for the record, and then we'll begin your 3 minutes.
Mike Whelan, 29122 High Plains Road, Caldwell, Idaho, 83607. Just a couple of comments. Excuse me. I take exception with Mr. Lakey keeps referring to the HOA is okay with the road, and we think it's in good condition. I've talked to several of our neighbors, and we're all pretty much on the same page that the road is not in good condition. So I don't know where this keeps coming from. To me, it's just a statement being made to sound good. But we're not okay with the road. You can see the potholes on it. So that's my biggest exception with it. And again, think that along with what I believe Steve had said, it's putting lipstick on a pig, just retopping it. That's it.
Okay, any questions? All right, thank you for your testimony, Melissa and Mike. All right, it is 12:30. Do we want to begin taking rebuttal testimony? I know that there's a few things that I definitely want to request, so I'm not anticipating a decision today.
I support that, Madam Chair. We've received late exhibits and information that I think is relevant to the deliberation and decision that the board needs the opportunity to evaluate.
Would like if Mr. Lake, you could come to the front and we could at least talk through some of the things that were needed. And since it's fresh on your mind, maybe we can wrap up rebuttal. Is that what you prefer?
Madam Chair, I'm okay commenting on rebuttal, and then if you have follow-up,
okay,
we can rebuttal open.
Let's go ahead and do that. So, yes.
Let's say if we're going to get new exhibits in, we'll have to give everyone the opportunity to review those,
right,
and then rebut the. It's not just rebuttal again, more rebuttal. It's new hearing, and then additional rebuttal.
So, Madam Chair, for clarification, you're saying if we leave this hearing open and there's new information, we should hold rebuttal so that the additional information can be reviewed and not rebutted again.
Or you could say, I mean, you can have rebuttal now, but you'll have to do it again on the new
And provide an opportunity for testimony on those exhibits.
Just those exhibits, not rehashing that.
Well, not necessarily, yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead with rebuttal for now.
Okay.
And we'll begin your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, before we start, again, Todd Blakey, 12905 UT Coordinate item. Madam Chair and Commissioners, just hit on some of the high points again. We are talking about a consistent extension of the existing development that was anticipated. See these, again, as we discussed it with staff, as an opportunity to maintain the agricultural character of the area. With roughly 9-acre lots allows those kind of activities that have existed compatibly in the High Plains Estates subdivision currently. We're willing to do the wildlife study, as was mentioned, that incorporate their recommendations. Those folks that are out there that love the wildlife, they've been existing compatibly, just like these folks. 9 acres gives you a very large piece of land for birds and wildlife to move through what they want. Those things. The specific comments noted that sensitive species were, they believed, were in the vicinity, but no specific note that they were on this property. Wildlife study can determine that, and if there's some build time around that, as you mentioned, Commissioner, we can deal with that. But certainly there isn't any long-term nesting areas or things on the property that's been farmed off and on. There was a little bit of confusion in some of the opposition testimony. Understand we addressed that in our direct testimony, but we will be meeting county road standards. So that's not a question. We're okay with that condition. We'll work through that issue with our engineers, subject to the county engineer approval. Just to correct one thing, we do have a specific agreement with the HOA. It's in Exhibit 6. It was generated at the time in regards to some additional improvements that my client was going to pay for on the road. And it talked about recognizing that parcel 14 would be developed. It had an 8.5 acre lot size at the time, which is what we were proposing for an average, but we're willing to 8 acre minimum. Most of our lots are close to 9.
There's a lot of Exhibit 6. Can you tell me which one?
I might, Madam Chair, not lose my time. And it's about, you got Exhibit 7, and you got 6 of you. Last couple pages of 6.
So would you say that this is an amendment to the PCNR?
No, I would say this is just an agreement between the HOA and Mr. Brown as to how we would move forward. Again, agreement, understanding, call it what you will, but we didn't see it as an amendment to the PCNR's.
Madam Chair, I want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. You're talking about the letter sent by Stephen and Teresa Schwartz?
No,
the attachment, it's the attachment that was included in that email from the Steve Schwartz.
I think we submitted it with our application as well, but I didn't find it there. I found it over here in 6.
Is it past the photos?
Right past the photos.
So it's letter dated December 20, 2018, Hudson State Property Owner Association. And it includes 3 pages.
Correct. Mr. Brown and the president and secretary. Treasurer and vice president. Okay, Madam Chair, continuing on. So I guess we can look at that Exhibit 2. Madam Chair, as was referenced, we will comply with the floodplain ordinance. That's our requirement. We're not looking for a deviation or an exception. I will note that Mr. Brown definitely feels like the change in the roads on the agricultural operations affected that. He had seen that kind of flooding previously since they've owned the property. But I will also note that Mr. Craig, if you look at that floodplain, did build his house right in the floodplain. So there is that issue, along with his neighbors to the immediate west. Our responsibility is to maintain and protect that floodplain. And then Mr. Craig would have that same responsibility in operation. Just briefly, the previous project that was not approved had 27 lots. The Liberals opposed it at the time. The homeowner opposed it at the time. So different projects, less dense by about a third, and different scenario with support from all and understanding of the HOA. Again, we're good with the building envelope requirement. Our plan is to stay out of the floodplain. Therefore, those homes and structures on our lot would not be impacted by any of those floodplain issues. We're out of the floodplain. And our individual uses, I anticipate, will have less of an impact than the more concentrated agricultural irrigation that is going on during season compared to the individual uses versus the agricultural irrigation. These homes will be higher value and frankly will contribute more to the tax base for the school than the standard more urban type development. Higher contribution above the homeowner's exemption and less service. Commissioners, as we said, people move out there for a reason. They accept the pluses and minuses of living in a rural area. Response times are going to be less, but they love and appreciate the area. The same reason these folks would purchase these type of lots and provide that demand. The main issue that we heard about repeatedly from those folks with concern was Chalico Road. Again, we're willing to address that and be subject to that condition. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek?
I heard in there that you were willing to do the wildlife study. What's your timeline? Is that before or after? I didn't know if that had changed. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek, the requirement talks about it being part of the plating process. So our anticipation would be to complete that wildlife study and include it in our plat.
So it would be after a decision at the board level, is it, assuming that that was an approval? That hasn't changed.
Madam Chairman and Commissioner Van Beek, yes, we weren't talking about the submission as part of this process. You certainly have the power to require that. But really, when you're starting to lay out the project, you set the maximum. You can have 20 lots, that's the cap. 8-acre minimum lot size. You don't know where the homes are going to be. Building envelopes at this point. Those are issues that are really best addressed at plating. And we'll have to submit that. And if you have conditions of the plat that we limit direction, or limit construction for certain times of the year, if wildlife are found on the site, that can be a requirement condition of plating.
Madam Chair. So I'm thinking about the size of this parcel, which is 190 acres, and then Mr. Craig's comments about the potential disruption to wildlife with habitat. But if only 90 acres of this was farmable, that means that the other 100 acres was left in natural habitat. So I'm just asking for verification, if we follow the same line of reasoning, that 90 acres would be available for building. Is that right? On that, because if you're unable to farm because of the slopes, they're unable to build because of the slopes. I'm trying to decide if there's going to be ground left for wildlife. They're not going to be able to do a lot with the hillside slopes. Do you see where I'm going?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek, I might just confirm a portion of your initial question as to how much was actually farmed, and then I'll answer that.
Okay.
Okay. So, Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek, it sounds like about 90 to 100 acres have actually been farmed in the past. So, no issues with disturbance there. The portions on those lots to the north, there are hillside rolling topography, different elevation changes. With a 9-acre lot, again, you've got a lot of room to be able to comply with the hillside ordinance. The hillside ordinance doesn't prohibit development. It simply says you have to do it this way. You're going to do it. And that can mean excavation and grading and extra engineering for the lot. I suppose it's possible that one of those lots may not be able to have a building permit. That's something we have to go through in planning. We don't anticipate that, but we think they're viable buildable sites. They just will require extra compliance and engineering.
Okay, and I guess I was getting at here, and we're getting there, but in that they could potentially disrupt those hills where there's habitat by grading and excavating. I had in my mind that because there's a building envelope, they would leave the rest of that in place and do that fire mitigation plan for the landscaping that would encourage the natural habitat and maintain the character of the area. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know what the applicant has in mind.
Madam Chairman and Commissioner Van Beek, the building envelope would limit the location of structures. So the primary disturbance for the site, and for example, the curlews, they're a migratory bird. They're not there year round. They come, they nest, they leave. So that's where the construction time frame could come into play, where you wouldn't disturb those species. That said, it's not a piece of ground that the bird has to locate there. They've got hundreds and hundreds of acres of BLM that they can choose from as far as where they locate. So it's really more about determining if there's some there and then working around that period of time where they're there.
Madam Chair.
Senator MP?
I'm sorry, I have one more question, and it's I guess it's a part of Exhibit 16, number 9, and it was important because we've had land use hearings that have referenced this before. It's the proposed Middleton Parks and Rec Gun Range Forest Park, and so what the statement says is that it would have 1,000-meter gun range camping facilities, basically in the back door of Lot 14. So talk about the safety component of that and proximity.
Which exhibit are you referring to, Commissioner?
Well, it's 60, and then it's the letter by Stephen and Teresa Schwartz.
Oh.
So it's page 3 of that letter, item number 9. And it says the details and the status of the park, which is contested, should be evaluated at any rezone and taken into account the other developments. So I don't know if there's still a proposed gun range on that site that was contested at the last land use hearing, but to have a gun range with neighbors, I don't know.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Van Beek, I'm not aware of any proposed gun range, horse park, close proximity to the site. That would be some type of BLM approval process that they would have to go through with a lot of public comment and input. And if there's a gun range, I suppose, located out here, all of those folks would be impacted the same way. But again, if we're talking about a bunch of wildlife out there, that's the concern. I anticipate it might be difficult to locate a gun range out there.
Dan, is that something that you can investigate?
Through the chair, this would be something not only the state would have to approve, but it would also come to us for an outdoor shooting range through the CUP process, as well as there is other items too, like an arena or anything like that would all come back to at least the conditional use permit, which would at least go to the planning and zoning commission. So we don't have any of that in any records of that being filed that I know of.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Van Beek.
Have that microphone.
What's that?
Microphone.
Last year the board did adopt the Middleton Recreation District Capital Improvement Plan. We did not adopt the impact fee. We did adopt that plan. And at the hearing on that, there was no specific plans for this facility. It was somewhat controversial, I guess, in discussions, but it was not, there were no firm plans for it.
Thank you for the clarification.
I have a couple questions. Did you ask about the access to the BLM historically via Chilocco?
I asked, Madam Chair. There was some discussion about BLM accesses. Again, speaking to some of the neighbors, they felt like there were existing BLM accesses out there for the current development. We're not aware of existing accesses on our property. There could be, and we would respect whatever limitations or requirements there would be for BLM to be able to access those lands. So that's about the best answer I can give.
So would you be okay with a condition that would allow for access to public lands from the property?
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I think we're willing to provide for that. I suppose you're talking about some kind of access easement across the lot or a couple of lots to provide that access. We're okay with that.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner White.
Does that mean if they want a four-wheel, if Mr. Craig wants to go four-wheeling out there and you have BLM access, they can drive over somebody else's property? Or would you leave that, you would just leave an easement through there or something? Help me understand that, Mr. Lakey.
Madam Chair and Commissioner White, the Commission was inclined to have that kind of condition. That what I anticipated would be some kind of easement. So it would be the overlay on somebody's property to be able to cross that for access.
Okay. Also, part of that problem would be allowing the public on Chilocco, which is a private road, which would increase the amount of traffic on that road as well. So I'm not necessarily saying that we should do that. I was just wondering if there was a current one that had access for the public to
I'm just saying
use the road.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, if I might respond from a practical standpoint.
Yes.
Madam Chair and Commissioner White, if that was a requirement, you'll notice that the road doesn't have the BLM ground there on the western edge. Yeah. So we could include a public access point off the road that would go across someone's property. If that was a plan.
Yeah. Commissioner Van Beek?
Madam Chair, I have just a hypothetical question for Mr. Lakey. Rio Lobo dead ends right there at that end of the property where there's a cul-de-sac. What's the possibility, and I know it's a stretch, but just entertain me for a second, if you extended that east, I don't know if that's a section line that goes along the southern border of that property, but there is an access, or at least a stub or something on the eastern end. You could potentially put that another road down that southern portion and join it to that eastern termination point that provides a secondary emergency access, but I don't know if that piece of ground that we talked about earlier is a part of that larger agricultural component that's to the south of that property line.
Can I jump in there really quick? It still doesn't create a secondary emergency access because that Rio Lobo, you have to use Chilocco. So that's still just one way in and one way out.
Even if you extended it east along the southern border of the property?
Yeah, because they would only have that, they'd go down Rio Lobo and then shoot north to Chilocco.
And I was talking about extending it all the way along the border of the property till the eastern.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I know.
So extending Rio Lobo all the way to Emmett Road.
Is that?
Well, I come across here, there's a stub right there, and there's no road there. It's only a little property.
Yeah. Right, and I wanted to know whose ownership that was, if that was a section line where you could do that, or if that was a part of that bigger ag ground. So I have a lot that's in that question, and we have to use our imagination for a minute.
Is that on a quarter section or section line?
No, I don't believe there's any future road on the functional class map or.
And that was my question.
Future connection.
Okay.
The highway district would have noticed that too.
Can I answer that for you?
I think that answers the question. To respond a little bit, again, there's there isn't a way to require private property owners to do that. I guess I would add a little bit that, again, folks have lived with that out there and understand it. Think that the code limits the fire district's ability to require that. There's also the other provision of code which talks about regarding access if it exceeds 30, and then they put you into the sprinkler requirement in lieu of secondary access. So there's I guess a discussion, for lack of a better term, to be had with the fire district on that requirement as far as fire.
Thank you for entertaining the question.
Okay. A minute ago when you were giving testimony, you talked about possibly protected animals that could be living on the property. Did I hear you right that the animals could choose a different habitat? Do you mean that?
Commissioner Smith, or Madam Chairman, in terms of the, I was speaking in terms of the code, yes, it did mean that they can, if somebody is building a house where they nested last year, they nested in the area, they can nest the alignment property that's exactly the same right next to it.
Madam Chair.
Were you done?
I think so.
Okay. Commissioner Van Beek?
And I just wanted to provide testimony that supports what Mr. Lakey is saying, and it was based on information obtained from the Idaho Department of Fish and Game when they evaluated a riparian corridor and a wetlands area. It doesn't seem nice or right. What they said was in the disturbance of those areas that the animals do repopulate and relocate. I didn't say I thought it was right. I said that was the opinion, and that's been a 20-year opinion that was provided by Idaho Fish and Game in a corridor that we valued along the Boise River. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make a correction there. Rio Lobo Strait is a section line, but there's no future road maps or future designation.
Thank you. Okay, Chair.
Yes, we're trying to, regarding the desire perhaps to require access to BLM, there is an Exhibit 5F that would require a permit from BLM. They would evaluate that. So even if we required it, if they didn't have a permit, it would kind of be a moot point. So I wanted to bring that exhibit to your attention. 5F.
Yeah, too, Madam Chair. You don't get a permit, you need to have the rest of it go down because you lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I just think that there could be a lot argued from the homeowners about the increased traffic that would cause if we did do that. I'm getting a head nod from Darren Taylor, so I don't know that we want to entertain that. So I think it's a new point. Yeah. Yeah, Madam Chair. Commissioner White?
I just want to go back and just kind of circle back. Okay. This is a request for a conditional rezone, and all of the conditions, and everything that so far that we've addressed is covered in the development agreement. Is that correct? Or what we have discussed, we can cover it in the development agreement?
Add them in. Correct.
Okay.
So, one of the things I wanted to review before I talked about the final things I wanted to ask for, the conditions of approval. I wanted to go through that conditions of approval, Exhibit B. 2A1, it was requested that the words to leave a minimum lot size of 8 acres, but also to include the average of 8.5 acres. Are you okay with that language?
I believe so. That's what we initially proposed was an average lot size.
Okay.
Yep.
And then for condition 2A, Roman numeral 4, this condition, it will state that the existing private road, Chilocco, will meet current requirements of Canyon County zoning ordinance section 71003, 2 and 3, and then if we add in the words at the developer's expense, to clarify.
Sure, as long as we're talking about the initial construction, not on.
Right. Okay, so we'll put construction improvements at the developer's expense.
The timing of when that had to occur for the segment out to the west.
Yes, I do want to do that. Okay. Good idea.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommended time frame of when you would comply with that? Maybe prior to the final plat?
With the road appointment,
Have Chilocco, yes. So specifically, when you would be able to agree to have the improved Chilocco Road rebuilt by?
Madam Chair, my final thought is standard.
So, does that mean that you would include that portion of the road on for the road improvements in the plating? So there'd be an expansion, like maybe a supplemental page on the preliminary and final plot that would show the details of that road construction?
Madam Chair, I don't know, whatever the normal process is to have the engineers talk and approve it.
Right. Yes, Madam Chair, we would just have the engineer certification that segment was done at the same, it's similar to what it would be for what's within the plat.
Okay. There is also testimony in one of the exhibits about the speed of traffic that is a concern, and they wanted to know if the 2 feet could be used for walking paths. And I will say from the history that I have with transportation planning, the wider a road gets, the higher the speed gets. And so, is there a way to keep the road narrow but provide a specific walking path?
Chair, there's a 60-foot ingress. It's more than an easement. It's a dedication. It's a lot. So the challenge being with that is fitting all of that within just right away. And if your desire is that we, to the extent possible, not impact improvements that are to the south, I guess I don't know, perhaps, but we're okay with the condition that will include the concept that we'll build a road and to the extent possible not disturb those improvements to the south that are built into that road lot. But walking path, additional 2 feet if you wanted to have some kind of stripe on it, or I don't know. Madam Chair.
Can you remind me the current road width?
About 22 feet. Which was standard back in the day, and now it's 24. There is some discretion with the director to modify that width. Keep it at 24.
Okay. I don't know how to mitigate that because we are increasing the width of the road, which will increase the speed. It just naturally does. I don't know. I'm going to keep thinking about that one. So we're going to delete B. On D, 2D, I'm going to remove the words "and approved by Idaho Fish and Game." And staff, can you work with them on including the language for the, well, are you comfortable with the sentence about the mitigation measures? Or, I think that that'd be nice to be able to review at the preliminary plat, so maybe a time frame that the mitigation measures be provided with the application.
Well, this is at the time of preliminary plat, shall be submitted to DSD and incorporated in the construction plan, so no discussion. No.
The assumption is that they have it done, if they have the mitigation measures, it's already been reviewed by IDFG.
So, but I'm worried about putting in well, you have your own separate CCNRs, so you're just gonna meet the other ones, so changing the CCNRs is a problem, requiring them to, from what I heard from both sides, that they're not gonna be amending the current CCNRs, they're leaving them.
Similar to the user's agreement, the recorded agreement that they'll maintain, because I think similar to the fire requirements that they're going to do best management practices, assume that would also be not added to their existing CCNRs, it would be added to an agreement for each lot within that subdivision to adhere to. Maybe you could agree with that.
I'll let you figure out how to write that.
Okay.
And then a condition 4, was a proposal from me. And this, I don't know if this is a condition or if it's pausing for more information, but I'd like to understand more about the amendment or transfer from IDWR from ag to residential. And I don't know if I necessarily need to understand more, but I want, with it being transferred, and the owner bearing the expense for the new well, those wells, if it's going to be used for dual purposes, are going to cost a lot. Whereas in a normal subdivision situation, the irrigation improvements would be bonded, so we would know that they were happening. At this point, like if someone came and bought the lot, they could cap, like top out on money and say, I'm just not going to choose to put in the well and the pressurized irrigation system and leave the land dry, which would become a weed nuisance and a fire problem. So, any solutions to that you guys could agree to? And again, like, I'm totally open with, like, continuing this, like, you guys hearing some of the concerns and trying to figure out plans. But that's one of my biggest worries.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner White?
Also there, when we were talking about that, you wanted a condition, you suggested a condition to not allow secondary uses.
Yeah, and I'm going to get there.
Oh, okay.
Yep, totally.
So, Madam Chair, we're not finalizing this work with staff.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to leave that one as a work with staff on the irrigation and IDWR for the transfer. Okay. And then a condition that states that the subdivision will join the existing homeowners association. Do we need that?
I don't know if you need it, Madam Chair. We consider ourselves part of it, but
you're already in it. Okay.
whatever.
Okay. And then a condition that would limit the uses to not allow for the golf course or the secondary residence. Or do you want to have the secondary residence?
I think that's already addressed. Talking about the second, only second, except for the.
Yeah.
Talking about
The two houses.
We'll take a look, Madam Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Don't have any
I don't think we have a problem limiting it down.
Okay, so then a condition that states, that secondary residences and golf courses are not allowed.
Might fit into Mr. Mell's game, but.
I know.
No golf course.
That'd be a challenge.
And then a condition for stormwater to be retained on site. I think that's standard, isn't it? Is that
Part of the fighting stage to demonstrate.
okay? So we don't need that one.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Van Beek?
how did the subdivision that Mr. Craig lives in, maybe it is retained on the site, but how did they get around that condition?
Because it's just an administrative land division, so it wasn't considered.
Thank you.
And then this one I would like a condition, and again, maybe just going back and considering this one, a plan for mitigation, for that dam, that, it needs resolved, and permitted and planned and,
Put a condition on the drainage plan that will be required to be submitted to not show any dams. I mean, that'll be all reviewed. Or have the drainage plan show any existing dams. We can deal with the drainage plan.
okay,
It's on this property.
show any existing dams and then how to retain the water.
Right. And if you're not permitted, or if they can get permitted, then it can.
Okay. Commissioner Van Beek?
So my concern then is it's an existing structure that helps mitigate flow and destruction of certain structures outside this, but
Well, I'll just speak in general terms, Madam Chair, Commissioner Van Beek. It really needs to be engineered. It may help one property, it may cause damage elsewhere, though. You have to really look at it.
and that's what I'm trying to get at, is that,
And that's what the drainage plan can look
okay,
at.
thank you for that clarification.
Conjunction with the flood requirement.
My concern is that we would remove something that's helping or flood control right now that would have an unintended consequence of impact because it's not permitted. So thank you for addressing that.
And then, last thing I'd missed adding, there was a request to, include in that condition for 2A, Roman numeral 4, regarding the street, that where possible, Chilocco be widened to the north.
That's the surface.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, versus the easement.
And then there was a request to add to the findings of fact that Chilocco Road is a non-conforming road.
I'm sure I think Mr. Taylor wanted lawful in front of that.
Legal.
Legal non-conforming road.
Quoting, yeah, but it can be added in the access finding as it's a legal non-conforming.
Okay.
And then, if I might comment on that if we get this one, once we approve it, then
it will be. Yeah, exactly. I think it's one of the things that I wanted to correct for the record. We were talking about, especially when I was talking about knowing the floodplain there, that it's unknown why the floodplain stopped where it did, but from testimony, it flows from the east to the west, so it actually starts there versus stops. So I think that's important to note, that we don't really know where the limit of that floodplain actually starts. It's unknown. It kind of is hard to establish risk with that, unfortunately. And I think that we could address that during the plating stage. So maybe just for the record to know that they need to look at the full drainage of the full site for the floodplain versus just where the mapped floodplain is. Are you okay with that?
Madam Chair, discuss that.
Okay.
Understand your property, but
right.
How that equates to a condition, a process other than complying with ordinance, I'm not sure.
Well, the ordinance, just complying with the ordinance, it's only mapped partially. And so theoretically, I think in court you could argue that the rest of the area is not a floodplain, but then I'm just playing devil's advocate, then we could argue that there is known flooding, so we could consider additional extent of the area. But I think for the record, it would just be clear if since we don't know where the floodplain starts, that we would consider the entire property to be looked at.
Madam Chair, you look at that area. We've got the natural drainages on the property concerned areas that are part of the floodplain.
Maintain. Okay, can you work on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Edit to 2A1 that shall not exceed 20 residential lots, because we'll have other lots due to the site, so it's clear. and residential lots.
Yeah.
Maybe other common lots or things that they get in with, but.
So good catch. All right, what is the advice of staff on continuing this hearing, so that we can go through those conditions again with testimony? Or what do you?
Madam Chair, was there other information you wanted prior to going into deliberation?
Oh, yes.
That's what I want to focus on.
I wanted, yes, thank you for asking that. It was the fire department. I wanted an interpretation if the 5 acres is per lot that will be the finished, or if we have to use that for the entire property. Because that does make a big difference if we have to have a secondary emergency exit. And so before we make a land use decision, I think that's really important.
I would probably recommend leaving the hearing open until we get that information.
And then if we can get additional information, like I would, like if we can compel a response from IDWR regarding the well for the transfer, and if we could compel the school district to respond to the issue of the school bus, and if a school bus route could be added, what the impacts of that would be. That's adding a lot of residences, so if it's possible.
Additional bus stop.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Stop.
And if the applicant was willing to consider a path, what that would look like to help with the safety concerns of people driving through that. It's not a requirement in my opinion at this point, but if you could at least explore the viability of that between now and then. How much time would, if we're going to try to compel information from some of the agencies, I'm guessing we should do 20 to 30 days?
This is staff's workload too. So that is.
I hate to delay you, I'm sorry, but is that okay? Sorry. Friday, the 30th. What about the week before? April 15th, give you enough time? Otherwise, I could join via WebEx the week of the 21st. I don't have anything out of town.
We have Mountain Mat Lucky that day, so what how long that will go?
Yeah, wait for it.
That one we have all the testimonies still.
Doesn't sound good.
The 15th doesn't. So, what if we did the 21st and the 22nd, and then I'll join via WebEx? Otherwise, we'd have to wait until the following week, the 26th or the 27th.
Following week, Madam Chair, is our 35th anniversary.
Yeah, okay. Afternoon of the 22nd, how about 1:30 on April 20th?
30 until 20.
On the WebEx. That'll be fun.
1:30, April 22nd.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Van Beek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we continue this hearing, leaving the public testimony open for investigative purposes until date specified of April 22nd at 1:30.
Second. There is a motion and a second by Commissioner White to continue this hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes, and that completes this hearing at 1:20.
Madam Chair, Commissioners.
Thank you.